On 10 September 20...
Mr.
Excellences, distingués collègues. Excellences, distingués collègues.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, in line with practice, allow me to start with some practical information. On 10 September 2025, I received two letters, one from the Permanent Representative of Pakistan on behalf of the Member States of the OIC, and the other from the Permanent Representative of the State of Kuwait on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council. Both letters call for an emergency debate during the 60th session in order, I quote, to discuss the recent military aggression by the State of Israel against the State of Qatar on 9th September 2025. By the Council, but with some practical information. On 10 September 2025, I received two letters, one from the Permanent Representative of Pakistan on behalf of the Member States of the OIC, and the other from the Permanent Representative of the State of Kuwait on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council. Both letters call for an emergency debate during the 60th session in order, I quote, to discuss the recent military aggression by the State of Israel against the State of Qatar on 9th September 2025. As decided by the Council at its meeting yesterday morning on 15 September, we shall now hold this urgent debate. The debate shall follow the same modalities as a general debate in the Human Rights Council, with a speaking time of 1 minute, 30 seconds for all. The list of speakers will be closed in 15 minutes. I now call on Mr. Volker Turk, High Commissioner for Human Rights, for his statement. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Israel's strike on negotiators in Doha on the 9th of September was a shocking breach of international law, an assault on regional peace and stability, and a blow against the integrity of mediation and negotiating processes around the world. As such, I condemn it and call on this Council and on all governments to do the same. The Secretary General has pointed out that Israel's action was a flagrant violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar. The members of the Security Council also expressed their condemnation. The attack violated the right to life under international human rights law and the principles of international humanitarian law. Targeting parties engaged in internationally supported mediation on its territory undermines Qatar's key role as a facilitator and peace broker. It is an attack on global efforts to resolve conflicts peacefully. I urge this Council to reaffirm the central importance of mediation processes and to call for accountability for unlawful killings. Mr. President, laws exist to defend values central to our societies and to our world. The rules of war which govern every party to armed conflict were agreed over decades for the common good. Under those rules, the distinction between civilian and military targets is fundamental. An attack may never be targeted at civilians who are not taking a direct part in hostilities. At their core, the main purpose of the rules of war is to minimize the use of armed force and to prevent and ease the suffering of civilians. When countries ignore them, they undermine the protection of civilians everywhere. In the case of the Israeli attack in Doha, the Hamas delegation was in Qatar to negotiate for a ceasefire, a vital step towards peace, and peace that is so desperately needed in Gaza, in the occupied West Bank, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen, and across the entire region. Mr. President, the Israeli attack was concurrent with other actions which are destroying any prospect of the two-state solution, the only route to sustainable peace. On the same day as the attack, Israel signaled a new phase of its assault on Gaza with a displacement order for some 1 million people to leave Gaza City without necessary provision for their safety and security. This is another blatant contravention of international humanitarian law. Meanwhile, as funerals were held for those killed in Doha, the Israeli government formally signed off on the so-called E1 project near East Jerusalem. The Prime Minister described this project as fulfilling the government's promise to stop the creation of a Palestinian state. This is the latest in a long list of illegal facts on the ground that are bringing the two-state solution closer and closer to a point of no return. Mr. President, our hearts break for the civilians of Gaza, for the Israeli hostages and their loved ones, for those arbitrarily held in Israeli prisons and their families. War without laws means a future of endless cruelty and suffering for civilians, both Palestinian and Israeli. This attack demonstrates the urgent need for member states to step up. Few have done so. The United Nations has been on the ground throughout, delivering aid and documenting violations at huge costs. Hundreds of our own colleagues have been killed. Nearly 2 years after the appalling terror attacks of 7 October 2023 and the ensuing escalation in violence, this carnage has to stop. Member states cannot wait any longer. They have an obligation to take concrete action to stop egregious violations of international law, including those spelled out by the International Court of Justice. They must stop the flow of Israel of arms that risk violating the laws of war. They must apply maximum pressure for a ceasefire, the release of all hostages and those arbitrarily detained, as well as the entry of sufficient humanitarian aid into Gaza. And I urge them to do everything possible to support the right to self-determination for the Palestinian people. I commend those states that are leading by their example. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la présence.
Thank you. I now call on Ms. Jovana Jejimirovic-Ranito, Chair Rapporteur of the Working Group on Mercenaries on behalf of the Coordinating Committee of the Special Procedures.
Mr. President, Excellencies and distinguished delegates, I have an honor of addressing the Human Rights Council today on behalf of the Coordination Committee of Special Procedures in the context of the urgent debate to discuss the recent military aggression launched by Israel against the State of Qatar on 9 September 2025. This attack is a grave breach of the United Nations Charter, especially the prohibition of the use of force against the territorial integrity of any state. Such illegal actions violate the right to life, undermine international multilateral order, and risk further destabilization of the region. Israel's continued attacks against multiple sovereign states, in addition to the crimes it is committing against the Palestinian people, are normalizing the use of violence under the guise of self-defense and are sending a deeply troubling signal that might can override the rule of law. Mr. President, Israel's latest attack in the region came as a critical moment when Qatar, together with Egypt and the United States, was leading efforts for a ceasefire and the release of hostages. By targeting individuals gathered to discuss these proposals, Israel undermined one of the few credible avenues to restore peace and prevent further destruction in Gaza and open a path to peace. Killing members of a negotiating team not only violates international law, but also breaks the very foundation of the peace diplomacy, which requires dialogue conducted in good faith rather than the deceptive use of force. The Coordination Committee echoes the Secretary General's condemnation of this attack as a violation of Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Respect for these principles are not optional. They are the foundation of the United Nations system and must be upheld by all states, regardless of circumstances. We applaud the continuous efforts of Qatar to secure a ceasefire and release of all hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Excellencies, this aggression also illustrates the instructable link between the three pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. Peace is a precondition for realizing human rights and achieving sustainable development. When diplomacy is undermined by unilateral illegal military action, cycles of violence and lawlessness are triggered. Apart from resulting in the loss of lives of innocent people, such actions widen distrust, weaken the rule of law, obstruct humanitarian access, and divert resources away from sustainable development. The effects of such acts erode international norms and encourage impunity, creating conditions in which further human rights violations become more likely. This aggression is the latest in the series of demonstrating the right-based international multilateral system is being substituted by a might makes right system, testing the entire UN system to the limits. Conflicts continue to inflict immense suffering on people with limited effective international response. One main reason is that states and other actors are failing to uphold the values and principles enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the UN Charter. Without a determined effort to respect international human rights law and international humanitarian law, there is a risk of the UN and human rights system collapsing with devastating consequences. Hence, the Human Rights Council cannot remain silent in the face of dangerous precedents set by Israel. We strongly urge Israel to respect international law and to refrain from further actions that jeopardize prospects of peace and threaten regional stability. It must immediately halt its offensive in Gaza City, allow unrestricted access to humanitarian aid, and end its illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories as required by the International Court of Justice and the UN General Assembly. We call on all states to stand in solidarity with Qatar and take collective actions to hold accountable those responsible for this attack. Accountability is not only a legal imperative, but also an essential condition for restoring trust in the mechanisms of diplomacy and conflict resolution. The international community should not allow Israel to be law unto itself, nor should it allow a state to shield another state from accountability for grave and systemic violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law. At this critical moment, the international community must strengthen support for mediation and humanitarian relief. The urgent need for a ceasefire in Gaza, the release of hostages, and the delivery of aid cannot be delayed. The people in Gaza have endured immense suffering, with tens of thousands killed and almost an entire territory devastated. They deserve dignity, justice, accountability, and a durable peace. Mr. President, the Coordination Committee, as well as the Special Procedure Mandate holders, stands ready to support the Council, the High Commissioner, and all relevant actors in monitoring and responding to the human rights implications of the crisis. The principles of the UN Charter, the protection of human rights, and the rule of law must guide our collective response. We cannot allow aggression, impunity, and disregard for international law to become the new norm. Qatar, the people of Gaza, and the wider region look to the Council to act with resolve and uphold the core values on which the United Nations was founded. It is critical to reassert human rights as a pathway to address all ongoing crises and to create a peaceful and sustainable world for all. I thank you.
Merci. Nous allons...
Thank you. We will now hear the concerned countries. I note that the delegation of Israel is not present in the room. I call on the distinguished representative of Qatar, Her Excellency Mariam bint Ali bin Nasser Al Misnad, Minister of State for International Cooperation. You have the floor.
Rahman Rahim.
In the name of God, most merciful, most compassionate, Mr. President, Excellencies, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the Human Rights Council for its rapid response to convening this emergency debate, which reflects the Council's pivotal role in safeguarding human rights and promoting international peace and security. We also appreciate the positions of member states that supported the convening of this session. On Tuesday, September 9, my country, Qatar, was subjected to a treacherous attack in the form of an airstrike that has targeted populated areas in the heart of the capital, Doha, near diplomatic missions, schools, kindergartens, and mosques. This area is inhabited by 5,000 people, including families of citizens and residents and members of the political bureau of Hamas and their families. This attack resulted in deaths and injuries, including the martyr Corporal Badr Saad al-Dosari, 22 years old, and 18 other wounded. This is not only a flagrant violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the State of Qatar, but also constitutes a major breach of basic human rights, the right to life, security, protection of children, and education, as recognized by international conventions, notably the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Conventions on the Rights of the Child. This attack represents a violent, flagrant violations of international humanitarian law by targeting a purely civilian area. An attack on a full member state of the United Nations, amounting to state terrorism and a direct threat to regional and international peace and security. What makes this crime even more
سلام. ولقد أسهمت الوساطة القطرية منذ 7 أكتوبر في تحقيق نتائج ملموسة.
States and Egypt to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. Targeting the mediating state is targeting the principle of negotiation itself. The Qatari mediation since October 7 has reached tangible results. And targeting the mediating state not only undermines the negotiation process, but also dispels all opportunity to save more lives and achieve peace. This experience confirmed that the Qatari mediation was never a formal act, but rather a concrete practice that has saved lives and restored rights. Mr. President, this attack was not an isolated incident, but rather was part of a broader campaign aimed at distorting Qatar's role and obstructing its diplomatic efforts. This was confirmed by the statement of the Israeli Prime Minister, who clearly announced the continuation of threats against other countries in a dangerous escalation that even threatens to drag other countries. As for the Arab and Islamic position, the Arab Islamic Summit held yesterday said unanimously that it condemns the brutal aggression and rejects any attempt to justify it, consider it a flagrant violation of the international law and the United Nations Charter, and emphasize the concept of collective security. Mr. President, unfortunately, we have become accustomed to the news of death, of attacks, and starvation in our world today. I have a question. What are we waiting for? What is the message that we are sending to the world if we are unable to stop hostility, hatred, and violence through international treaties and conventions? What messages are we sending to future generations regarding the respect of human rights and our trust and confidence in law? If the rule of law is absent, then the logic of force will prevail. We are here to seek a way to achieve peace, we can normalize life, not death, law and not chaos, unity and not disintegration. Therefore, we would like to affirm the following. We condemn the treacherous attack of Israel and the targeting of civilians and violation of international law. We call on this Council and the international community to take practical steps to hold the aggressors accountable and prevent their impunity, to warn of the danger of targeting mediating states, and to renew Qatar's commitment to the approach of mediation and work for peace despite this aggression, as we have this moral and legal duty to do so. At the end, we are confident that the Human Rights Council will not accept any violation of human rights principles and will not tolerate this flagrant violation. We are confident that it will place the protection of international law as a priority for the sake of stability and preserving the role of mediation as an essential tool for ending conflicts and ensuring that people enjoy their freedom and security. Thank you.
Merci. La liste.
Thank you. The list of speakers is now closed, and we shall start the list of members of the Council. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. تقدر.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We appreciate holding this urgent debate in a very dangerous setting following the blatant aggression by Israel on the state of Qatar, while Qatar was undertaking its humanitarian role as a mediator for a ceasefire, ending the crisis in Gaza, and releasing the detainees. The GCC countries insist on the fact that protecting civilians, respecting international law, promoting human rights is a collective responsibility that we should all fulfill. And it is our duty today to send a strong message, a clear one, that aggression on the sovereignty of countries, jeopardizing the lives of civilians, spreading terror, and hampering mediation are acts that cannot be accepted and the perpetrators should be held accountable. We call for joint international efforts in order to respect international humanitarian law, protecting countries that undertake mediation roles that protect and promote human rights and work on safeguarding international peace and security. In this context, we invite you to adhere to the joint statement by the State of Qatar. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je donne la parole au
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of Pakistan on behalf of the OIC.
Mr. President, the OIC Group welcomes the convening of this urgent debate of the Council. We thank the High Commissioner for his remarks and also thank Her Excellency Mariam bint Ali bin Nasser bin Al Masnad, Minister of State for International Cooperation of the State of Qatar, for her address to the Council. The OIC Group condemns in the strongest terms the Israeli aggression against Qatar on 9 September 2025 in blatant violation of international law and the UN Charter. We strongly denounce this attack on the mediation process that Qatar has hosted commendably alongside regional and international countries to address the catastrophic humanitarian crisis in the OPT, particularly Gaza. This unjustifiable and unprovoked attack constitutes a dangerous escalation threatening the very foundation for the enjoyment of all human rights by all peoples in the region, as well as an attack on the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of the State of Qatar under the pretext of countering terrorism. We affirm our solidarity with the State of Qatar and support all steps it may take to protect its security and sovereignty in accordance with the UN Charter. We call on the international community to compel Israel to stop its dangerous and ongoing attacks in the region and urge the Council and its mechanisms to ensure accountability for Israel's serial violations of international law. Initiatives such as mediation by Qatar and other countries offer a starting point towards a just and lasting regional peace with equal rights and dignity for all peoples in the region, especially the people under occupation in Palestine. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of Algeria on behalf of the Group of Arab States.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. أتشرف بإلقاء هذا البيان.
Thank you, President. I make this statement on behalf of the Group of Arab States. The attack by the Israeli occupants against the Qatari capital Doha is a crime which will go down in the lengthy history of Israel's violations of the UN Charter and established practice. The Arab group condemns this attack as well as the attacks against other Arab states such as Syria and Yemen, and this escalation of violence may aggravate the instability in the region. We are gravely concerned at this attack on a state acting as mediator. It undermines the mediation which seeks to end the war in Gaza and is an aggravation, a violation of the UN Charter. We stand in solidarity with Qatar. The war in the region is fueled by total impunity, and our group calls on the international community to act urgently to end these violations and require all parties to respect international law. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la...
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Microphone.
Albania, the Republic of Moldova, Liechtenstein, Iceland, and Norway align themselves with this statement. The EU expresses its condemnation of the airstrikes in Doha and underlines its support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar, in line with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. The Israeli attacks on Hamas leaders caused also Qatari casualties. The EU expresses its full solidarity with Qatar, our strategic partner, which alongside Egypt and the United States plays a crucial role as mediator of the conflict in Gaza. The focus of the international community must remain on reaching a ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and unimpeded access of humanitarian assistance to Gaza. The EU strongly supports the determination expressed by the Prime Minister of Qatar to continue his country's mediation role. The EU has consistently called on Israel to respect international law, including international human rights law and international humanitarian law. We urge all parties to refrain from any actions that jeopardize mediation channels and regional stability and remain committed to the two-state solution. We recall that the EU and other international partners have listed Hamas as a terrorist organization. Recently adopted new sanctions regimes underline our principled stance against terrorism in all its forms. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of Ghana on behalf of the group of African states.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the African Group. The African Group commends the convening of this urgent debate that demonstrates the ability of the Human Rights Council to respond swiftly to human rights challenges worldwide. The African Group expresses deep concern regarding the armed attack by Israel against the State of Qatar on 9 September 2025. The group underscores the importance of adherence to international law and the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and calls for restraint, dialogue, and peaceful resolution to the situation. Furthermore, the group recognizes the important role of states engaged in mediation efforts and the facilitation of peaceful dialogue and underscores that any measures directed against a state actively contributing to such efforts raises serious concerns under international law, particularly with respect to the principles of sovereignty, non-intervention, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. Such actions not only challenge the integrity of international norms, but also risk undermining the safeguarding of human rights across the global community. Lastly, Mr. President, the African Group reaffirms the importance of the principles of justice, peace, and equality in the international arena, and further affirms that efforts to mediate and promote peace must be respected, and that no actor should face reprisal for pursuing dialogue and reconciliation. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Je donne la parole au
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of South Africa on behalf of a group of countries.
And I have the honor to deliver this joint statement on behalf of a cross-regional group of 74 states. The full text will be available on the extranet. Today, we stand united in defense of the rule of law, human rights, peace, and security, founded upon freedom, equality, and respect for international law. Today, we stand to condemn the use of force against peace-loving countries. Today, we stand to support the State of Qatar, its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and condemn in the strongest terms the heinous armed attacks in Doha launched by Israel on the 9th of September 2025. Today, we express our deep concern over the precedent of targeting a state that is engaged in mediation efforts and facilitating dialogue between parties to an armed conflict. President, it is high time that the international community uses every available opportunity to make Israel abide by the rules and principles of international law. Accordingly, we strongly condemn all attacks directed against neutral and mediating states in violation of international law, recognize the crucial role of mediating states in facilitating dialogue. We welcome the commitment of Qatar to continue its mediating efforts. Finally, we urge this Council, its relevant mechanisms, the UNHRC, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, to monitor and report on incidents of attacks against mediating states and to provide recommendations on strengthening their protection under international law. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué.
Thank you very much. I recognize Kuwait.
Mr. President, my country's delegation aligns itself with the statements of the groups to which we belong. Our country strongly condemns and denounces the brazen and cowardly attack on the brotherly state of Qatar by the Israeli forces, which led to a number of martyrs and a number of civilians being wounded. My country reiterates that this coward attack is a blatant violation to all international laws and regulations and a serious threat to the peace and stability in the region and its security, as well as undermining international peace and security. We reiterate our position that it is imperative for the UN and international community to fulfill their responsibilities to preserve international peace and security and take serious measures and firm measures to end the systematic attack by the Israeli entity on the region and attacks on the civilians. My country is steadfast in its support to the brotherly state of Qatar in its measures to preserve its security, stability, sovereignty, and preserving its citizens and residents. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué représentant.
Thank you very much. Indonesia.
Mr. President, on behalf of the government and the people of the Republic of Indonesia, allow me to express our deepest solidarity with the state of Qatar in the wake of Israel's aggressions on Doha. Indonesia condemns in the strongest terms this unlawful act. It is a grave violation of the UN Charter and the international law. Striking a state serving as a mediator is a blatant betrayal to the peace process, and every path to peace will be under attack if such assault continues with impunity. It has destroyed trust and undermined hope to end the suffering in Gaza. This cannot continue. The international community must act decisively. Mr. President, Indonesia welcomes the communique agreed by the Arab Islamic Emergency Summit yesterday, and we stand ready to support its follow-up. But let us be clear, lasting peace in the Middle East will never be achieved without a two-state solution. Any denial of this fundamental right is unacceptable. Indonesia stands firmly with Qatar, with Palestine, and with all nations that courageously uphold justice, defend sovereignty, and protect our shared values of humanity. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué.
Thank you very much. I now recognize China.
Mr. President, on the 9th of September, Israel launched an attack in Qatar, which flagrantly violated Qatar's territorial sovereignty and national security, openly disobeyed the international law and UN Charter, and blatantly undermined the efforts on peace process. China firmly rejects and categorically condemns such acts. Respecting other countries' sovereignty and territorial integrity is part of the basic norms of international relations. Yet Israel disregards this norm and frequently initiates military operations to other neighboring countries. As a vital party for good offices in the negotiation of ceasefire in Gaza, Qatar has made enormous efforts to promote the ceasefire and restore peace, which have been widely recognized by the international community. Yet, it was during the discussion on ceasefire agreement in Qatar that delegation of Hamas was attacked by Israel. Such act is a deliberate attempt to derail the negotiation process. Abuse of military power is never a solution to any problem. China strongly calls upon all parties, Israel in particular, to take more positive efforts for the cessation of conflict and resumption of negotiation, to earnestly observe the international humanitarian law and human rights law, and to respect the right to life of people in other neighboring countries. We stand ready to work with the international community to play a constructive role in the efforts of ending conflict and de-escalating the tension in the region. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Je donne la...
Thank you very much. And I recognize the distinguished representative of Cuba, please. Thank you very much, President. Military aggression against Qatar constitutes another serious episode in a chain of violations of international law and the Charter committed by Israel, which is acting with impunity under the protection of the United States, undermining regional peace and stability. The attack in Doha, that Cuba robustly condemns, represents a new extrajudicial execution and is an affront to human rights. Not content with illegally occupying Palestinian and Arab territories or committing a genocide in Gaza, Israel is launching indiscriminate attacks against civilians, journalists, doctors, and humanitarian workers. We reiterate our solidarity with the government and people of Qatar, victims of Israeli aggression. These actions are locating the region and the world full in the face of a conflagration with unprecedented consequences. Israel is demonstrating once again its non-intention, deliberate lack of intention to engage in any peace process, rather to sabotage it. This criminal act is only possible thanks to the political and military support of the United States. The way the international community responds will be decisive for the multilateral system. As our president expressed, Cuba will not remain indifferent. We will continue to defend international law and peace and the rights of the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you very much. I call on Germany, please.
Mr. President, Germany thanks the government of Qatar and all member states of the OIC and the GCC for their initiative to hold this urgent debate. We join fellow members of this council in condemning the violation of Qatar's territorial sovereignty. It is unacceptable and poses a risk to achieving a negotiated deal which would secure the release of all remaining hostages and end the war in Gaza. Germany wishes to express its strong and sincere appreciation for Qatar's crucial mediation role in this conflict. We urge that everything possible be done right now so that a permanent ceasefire can finally be reached. The people of Gaza can receive desperately needed humanitarian assistance, and the hostages can return to their families. One thing remains clear: it is up to Hamas to lay down arms, unconditionally release all hostages, and abandon terror against the state of Israel. The violence that we have seen over the last months is an outcome of Hamas' horrific terrorist attack on Israel on 7th of October 2023. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Je donne...
Thank you very much. The distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea aligns itself with the Security Council press statement issued on 11 September 2025, in which Council members expressed their condemnation of the recent strikes in Doha, the territory of a key mediator. These attacks are unacceptable as they violate the principles of the UN Charter, including respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, and risk further escalating instability in the region. We are also deeply concerned that these Israeli attacks targeting Hamas were carried out within the territory of the State of Qatar, which has played a vital role in easing regional tensions and addressing the dire human rights and humanitarian crisis that has persisted since the terrorist attacks by Hamas 2 years ago. By striking a mediator, these attacks jeopardize ongoing negotiations to secure an immediate ceasefire, ensure the release of all hostages, and facilitate humanitarian aid. The Republic of Korea highly appreciates Qatar's commitment to mediation despite these recent attacks, and we reaffirm our support for all diplomatic efforts toward a peaceful resolution. No state, under any circumstances, is exempt from the obligation to respect the international law. We sincerely hope that a comprehensive and lasting resolution of the conflict, grounded in the vision of a two-state solution, will be achieved without delay. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you very much, and I recognize the distinguished representative of Colombia. President, Colombia supports this urgent debate and robustly condemns the attacks perpetrated by forces of the Israeli state in Doha, Qatar on the 9th of September, which constitutes a comprehensive violation of international law and violation of a mediator state sovereignty. It's symbolic that the attack took place in Qatar. This is a country which promotes negotiation and seeks diplomatic exits to confrontation. These actions undermine the multilateral system and they weaken principles of international law. As a result, we reiterate our invitation to member states to stand together with the Hague Group and progress towards concrete measures to guarantee accountability following violations of international law. Colombia calls for the preservation of peace and the guarantee of the strict respect for international humanitarian law. Human rights and the protection of life and the civilian population are principles that must be safeguarded by the international community as a whole. Colombia recognizes the commitment of the State of Qatar to support peace and diplomacy and its efforts to promote negotiated political solutions. This deserves and warrants reiteration by all of us of our support. We urge and call for a peaceful settlement of the Palestine conflict and the fostering of a two-state solution. Thank you, President. Thank you very much. Says the President. Bangladesh, please.
Mr. President, Bangladesh unequivocally condemns the recent Israeli military aggression against the State of Qatar. Such actions constitute a clear violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar, as well as of international law and the principle of the UN Charter. Acts that target a mediator undermine every channel towards de-escalation and peace process. Mr. President, Bangladesh stands in steadfast solidarity with the government and the people of the brotherly State of Qatar in the face of this unlawful and unprovoked attack. This incident is yet another indication of Israel's continued disregard for regional stability, international peace, and established international norms. Such actions undermine global efforts towards peace and security. Mr. President, we call on all parties to respect the inviolability of states engaged in mediation and to desist from any action that international law prohibits or that jeopardize regional stability. From this UD, we call for a clear affirmation that attacks on mediators and on sovereign territories are unacceptable and threaten broader regional understandings. We call upon the international community to take appropriate measures to ensure accountability and to uphold respect for international law and the UN Charter. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne...
Thank you very much. I now recognize Switzerland. President, Switzerland welcomes the holding of this urgent debate on the negative repercussions on human rights of the airstrikes undertaken in Doha against Hamas leaders engaged in ceasefire negotiations. We note that as a result, there have been serious human rights violations and civilians were killed or injured. Switzerland expresses its solidarity with Qatar and condemns these attacks, which constitutes an unacceptable violation of territorial integrity and sovereignty in the country. This also represents a key obstacle to negotiation efforts being undertaken by Qatar with a view to reaching a ceasefire agreement in Gaza. As regards the steps proposed by Qatar to respond to these strikes, we propose that this discussion is brought to the General Assembly because the Human Rights Council must remain a place for debate concerning human rights. Switzerland recalls that international law, including the UN Charter, international humanitarian law and human rights law must be respected in all contexts by all actors. Switzerland calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the freeing of all hostages and free humanitarian access in line with international humanitarian law. There is no military solution to the conflict in the Near East, and Switzerland calls for all parties to commit to a constructive solution through a political negotiation founded on a two-state solution and international law. Thank you. Thank you very much. I now recognize France, says the President. Thank you very much, President. High Commissioner, France aligns itself with the EU statement. France condemns the Israeli strikes, which impacted Qatar on the 9th of September 2025. These are unacceptable, regardless of the motive. France reiterates its commitment to respecting Qatar's sovereignty and expresses its solidarity with the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim Al Thani, and the people of Qatar. These Israeli strikes constitute a violation of international law and augur a new threat for regional stability. Nothing should turn us away from the aim of reaching ceasefire context and freeing all hostages still detained by Hamas in Gaza. France reiterates its unequivocal condemnation of the hideous crimes of Hamas, a terrorist movement. France calls on all parties to recommit in good faith to negotiations in Gaza towards a ceasefire. Qatar is playing a crucial mediator role in this conflict alongside Egypt and the United States. France recalls its support to the determination expressed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Qatar to continue this mediation. There is an alternative to the cycle of violence. France reiterates its call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. The unconditional freeing of all hostages, and a massive entry of humanitarian aid with no obstacle. These aims must be supported by a political solution, as you recalled, High Commissioner, based on a two-state solution. This is the only solution that will guarantee lasting and sustainable peace. Thank you very much. I'd now like to recognize Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Kyrgyzstan condemns in the strongest terms the aggression against Qatar, as reflected in a final communique adopted by the Extraordinary Arab Islamic Summit yesterday. We stand in full solidarity with Qatar and stress that targeting diplomatic and humanitarian facilities undermines regional peace and jeopardizes vital mediation efforts. The Human Rights Council must remain firm in upholding sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the protection of civilians. We therefore call for full accountability, the exercise of restraint, and renewed commitment to dialogue in order to prevent further escalation and safeguard international law. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au
Thank you very much. I now recognize Algeria, please.
Algeria strongly condemns and denounces the heinous Israeli aggression that targeted the Qatari capital, Doha. We express our full and unwavering solidarity with our brotherly state of Qatar in these alarming circumstances. The deliberate expansion of Israel's multifaceted and indiscriminate aggression, most notably the targeting of the negotiation team working to end the brutal assault on Gaza, clearly demonstrate that the occupying power has no genuine intention to pursue peace. This reckless act reveals a complete disregard for diplomacy and confirms once again that Israel recognizes no limits to its brutality nor respect for international law and fundamental humanitarian principles. It further proves that the release of hostages is neither important nor a priority for Israel. This dangerous escalation is made possible by the continued lack of accountability. While calls for accountability often resonate loudly in this council during country-specific debates, a troubling silence prevails when it comes to Israel. The failure to impose consequences only emboldens further crimes to erode the credibility of the international legal system. This extremely serious situation demands a resolute and urgent response. The international community must assume its responsibility and Israeli impunity and prevent this aggression from plunging the region into further instability and insecurity. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la...
Thank you very much. I now recognize Belgium. President, my delegation aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. Belgium supports this urgent debate and condemns Israel's violation of Qatar's territorial integrity. We would like to express our solidarity with Qatar's government and people, and we urge Israel to respect international law, including the principle of the sovereignty of other countries in the region. My delegation greets Qatar's determination to continue its role as mediator in the conflict and calls on all stakeholders to avoid any action which might jeopardize the mediation and regional stability. Belgium lobbies for the full respect of international law, the release of all hostages, and the immediate implementation of a ceasefire. We remain profoundly concerned by the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and insist that the provision of humanitarian aid must occur immediately. Thank you very much. Gambia.
Mr. President, the Gambia unequivocally condemns the recent Israeli airstrikes on the state of Qatar, which have resulted in devastating loss of life, widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure, and heightened instability across the Gulf region. These actions constitute a flagrant violation of international law, including the sovereignty of Qatar and the core principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter. We extend our deepest condolences and unwavering solidarity to the government and peoples of Qatar during this time of immense grief and challenge. The Gambia reaffirms its resolute support for Qatar's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and right to security. Respect for state sovereignty is the bedrock of the international order. Any act of aggression that disregards this principle not only undermines global peace and security, but also poses a profound threat to human rights worldwide. The Gambia urgently calls upon the international community and the Council in particular to take immediate and decisive action to halt further escalation, ensure accountability for these violations, and prioritize the protection of civilian lives. The Gambia remains steadfast in its commitment to dialogue, diplomacy, and peaceful coexistence. We pledge our full support to all efforts aimed at restoring peace, stability, and security in the Middle East and beyond. We thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Japan, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, Japan thanks the OIC and the GCC for the initiative to request convening of this urgent debate. Japan strongly condemns the attack by Israel in Qatar on the 9th of September. This action undermines ongoing diplomatic efforts, including by Qatar, and threatens Qatar's sovereignty and security, and consequently jeopardizes regional stability. Although we did not participate in the joint statement delivered by South Africa, as we are not fully convinced that the Human Rights Council is the best forum to address this issue, Japan expresses its solidarity with Qatar and once again strongly urges Israel to immediately return to negotiations and to work in good faith towards a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages. We believe those are urgent priorities. Peace and stability in the Middle East are of paramount importance to the region and to the international community as a whole. Japan urges all parties concerned to refrain from any actions, including acts of terrorism, that could undermine regional stability, and to maintain respect for international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. We strongly call for de-escalation of the tensions. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. The distinguished representative of Cyprus is recognized.
Cyprus fully aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. The Israeli airstrikes in a residential area in Doha are a violation of international law, violating Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity, while also causing civilian casualties. We welcome the UN Security Council press statement to this end. Cyprus has condemned these strikes and stands firmly in solidarity with Qatar. We value and acknowledge Qatar's leadership and long tradition in peaceful mediation. Qatar, alongside Egypt and the United States, is a vital facilitator for peace. Priority must be to secure the release of all hostages, achieve an immediate ceasefire, and deliver urgent humanitarian aid at massive scale for the civilians of Gaza. We urge all parties to uphold international law and refrain from actions that undermine stability and security in the region. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you very much. Brazil, please.
Mr. President, last week, at the beginning of this HRC session, we heard warnings about the erosion of international law and its negative impact on human rights. Today, we gather to discuss another spillover from the Israeli military campaign against the state of Palestine. Brazil expresses solidarity with the state of Qatar following the recent Israeli attack against Doha, which we have strongly condemned as a blatant violation of fundamental principles of international law. The Israeli attack also undermines ongoing efforts to secure a ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip, given Qatar's important role as a mediator. Brazil is extremely concerned with the human rights situation in Gaza, particularly the indiscriminate attacks against civilians, including journalists, the famine imposed on its population, and the risk of mass forced displacement and re-invasion of Gaza City. All related human rights violations in the OPT and the wider regions must be investigated and perpetrators held accountable. We reiterate the appeal for permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip with the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from the territory, the release of the remaining hostages, and the immediate lifting of all restrictions on humanitarian aid. Brazil remains committed to a two-state solution.
Thank you very much. The distinguished representative of Spain is recognized. Thank you very much, President. Spain aligns itself with the EU statement. and robustly condemns the attacks of the 9th of September in Doha perpetrated by Israel. It expresses its solidarity with the Qatari authorities and people. The characterization of these attacks has been outlined eloquently by the High Commissioner, whose statement we align ourselves with fully, from the first word to the last full stop. In the face of this humanitarian catastrophe that we're witnessing in Gaza, we call for a permanent and immediate ceasefire. There is no military alternative to the diplomatic route to attain lasting peace in the region. We reiterate that the practical implementation of a two-state solution is the only road to peace and to satisfy the legitimate expectations of Israelis and Palestinians for a situation of stable security. We reject violence and the systematic human rights violations suffered by hundreds of thousands of civilians in Gaza and across other occupied Palestinian territories. We call for the immediate unrestricted entrance of humanitarian aid. Israel must act in line with international law and international human rights law. The mandate of this council is a core fundamental instrument for the United Nations to work for peace, the peace we also want to see and desperately yearn for in both Israel and Palestine. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you very much, and I recognize Ghana.
Mr. President, Ghana is deeply concerned by the unprovoked Israeli armed attack on the sovereign state of Qatar, resulting in the loss of lives and extensive damage to public property. This armed attack cannot be justified under any circumstance, and we roundly condemn it. The attack also constitutes a clear violation of international law and an affront to sovereignty of the state of Qatar. The attack equally undermines the ongoing pursuit of peace between the states of Palestine and Israel. Mr. President, Ghana stands in solidarity with the people of Qatar in these challenging times. We commend Qatar for their tireless and impressive commitment towards the resolution of the conflict between the states of Israel and Palestine, and further appeal that this condemnable incident is not allowed to derail Qatar's efforts in negotiating a peaceful diplomatic resolution of the conflict. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole au distingué représentant.
Thank you, and I call the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. South Africa expresses its solidarity with Qatar and condemns the strike carried out by Israel, which targeted a civilian compound located in Doha. This attack constitutes a violation of the UN Charter, global norms, and international law, breaching the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, while also undermining the safety of civilians and protected persons, amounting to war crimes. It strikes against the very heart of mediation processes, given the critical role that Qatar plays in efforts to facilitate a ceasefire in Gaza. It demonstrates that Israel does not want to end its genocidal war against the Palestinian people. As such, South Africa believes that the international community should end Israel's impunity and hold it accountable. Israel's belief that it is exempt from accountability has given rise to its genocidal attacks on the Palestinian people. It is time for the international community to demonstrate through practical countermeasures that Israel does not enjoy some form of special immunity from accountability. Accordingly, we call on Israel to desist from such attacks. We similarly call on Israel to immediately halt the unbearable suffering that it is inflicting on the Palestinian people and to bring a decisive end to its unlawful occupation of Palestine once and for all, which lies at the root of this attack. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Netherlands.
The Kingdom of the Netherlands aligns itself with the EU statement. We thank the OIC and GCC for convening this urgent session. We express our solidarity with the State of Qatar in light of the recent Israeli strikes in Doha on the 9th of September. The Netherlands condemns these attacks and underlines that Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected. We reiterate the urgent need to reach a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, to secure the release of all hostages, to enable a drastic increase of humanitarian aid, and to launch a process towards a sustainable solution to this conflict. This attack is clearly a step in the wrong direction and risks undermining ongoing efforts. The Netherlands highly values the important mediating role of Qatar and commends its continued commitment to this task. At the same time, the Netherlands reiterates its position that Hamas is a terrorist organization that must lay down its weapons and can have no role in the future of the Gaza Strip. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Morocco for a video statement.
تعرف المملكة المغربية عن إدانتها الشديدة للعدوان التي استهدف سيادة دولة قطر الشقيقة.
The Kingdom of Morocco firmly condemns the Israeli aggression on Qatar, which is a flagrant violation of international law and a threat to regional security. Morocco is in complete solidarity with our fraternal country of Qatar and supports everything it can do to protect the serenity of its citizens, its peace and security. This is why we call upon the international community to address this situation, taking a firm stance. The Kingdom of Morocco, pursuant to the vision of His Majesty, considers that the two-state solution with the creation of a Palestinian state in the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital is the only way to bring justice to the Palestinian people and to instill peace and security and stability in the region. In this context, Morocco rejects firmly the behavior and the provocative declarations by Israel on the deportation of Gaza citizens and the settlement activities in the West Bank, which are undoubtedly a violation of international law and IHL. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, for procedural reasons, we are going to close this meeting and have a 1-minute break before we carry on with our urgent debate. And if time then allows, to continue our interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation. So I declare the 11th meeting of the 60th session of the Human Rights Council closed.
Merci. Excellence.
Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I declare open the 12th meeting of the 60th session of the Human Rights Council. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues.
Merci.
Thank you. We shall now carry on with the list of speakers and members of the Council, and I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Maldives.
Maldives, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Maldives strongly condemns the brutal, unprovoked attacks carried out by the Israeli occupation forces against the sovereignty and security of the State of Qatar on 9 September. The Maldives rejects this path of destruction and stands unwavering in defense of human dignity, justice, and the right to live free from oppression and occupation. From Palestine to Yemen, from Syria to Lebanon, and now in Qatar, Israel has acted with arrogance, impunity, and contempt for the very foundations of international law. Yet Israel is shielded by double standards that undermine the very foundations of international law. Mr. President, the Maldives condemns Qatar's vital and constructive role, commends Qatar's vital and constructive role in facilitating mediation efforts, including its work towards achieving a ceasefire. Qatar's steadfast commitment to dialogue, diplomacy, and peace has alleviated suffering and earned the profound respect of the international community. The Maldives stands in solidarity with the government and people of Qatar. We reiterate our call on the international community to uphold its responsibility to maintain international peace and security and to hold Israel accountable for its continued violations. We further urge the international community to make immediate effective measures to deter Israel from committing further violations of international law. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la...
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Sudan.
شكرا سيد الرئيس يأتي.
Thank you, President. This brutal aggression on our brotherly country of Qatar confirms more than ever before that the United Nations Charter that brings us together here in this room, international law and multilateralism are all under threat. When a state is attacked whilst it is playing a leading role in mediation and in peace building, you are also attacking international peace and security. We condemn most strongly this attack by Israel on the state of Qatar. We stand in solidarity with Qatar and its people, and we praise the peaceful role played by Qatar in Sudan and its good offices, in particular in the humanitarian sphere. This aggression is a direct attack, in reality, on the mediation efforts underway in Doha to bring an end to the catastrophe that we're seeing in the Palestinian territories and attempt to find a peaceful settlement. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la...
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Thailand.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thailand denounces the airstrike on the residential building in Doha on 9 September 2025. Such an act constitutes a blatant violation of Qatar's sovereignty and a flagrant breach of international law, as well as the Charter of the United Nations. This unlawful use of force serves only to heighten regional tensions and undermine the stability and safety not only of the state of Qatar, but also the wider region as a whole. It also poses a direct threat to international peace and security. Thailand highly appreciates the state of Qatar's role in mediating the conflict through peaceful means and facilitating negotiations for the rescue and releases of hostages, which include Thai nationals. Thailand reaffirms its principled stance against all forms of violence. We stand in full solidarity with the government and the state of Qatar in their efforts to safeguard peace, security, and stability in the region and beyond. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Mr. President, Vietnam condemns the use of force in violation of international law in the United Nations Charter, infringing upon the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. We call on all relevant parties to exercise restraint, avoid actions that could escalate tensions, and resolve differences through peaceful means in strict accordance with international law and the United Nations Charter. These efforts are essential to creating a conducive environment for negotiating a comprehensive and sustainable ceasefire in the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict in the interest of security, peace, and stability in the region and the world. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne...
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico. Thank you, President. Mexico expresses its solidarity with Qatar for the strikes in Doha on the 9th of September. This is a violation of its territorial integrity and its sovereignty. My country is in favor of peace, in step with the principles of foreign policy of our constitution, and we would call once again for full respect of international law and international humanitarian law. Mexico supports the press statement issued by the UN Security Council on the 11th of September and supports the mediating role of Qatar in this conflict. We would encourage Qatar to continue in these efforts and also urge all parties concerned to get involved seriously in this process. We call for an immediate permanent ceasefire in Gaza, the release of hostages, and the guarantee of full access to humanitarian aid. The devastating suffering of the population of Gaza compels us to do this. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Dominican Republic. Thank you, President. The Dominican Republic aligns itself with the expressions of solidarity with our friend, the State of Qatar, and condemns the aggression we saw in Doha on the 9th of September. This was a flagrant violation of its sovereignty and international territoriality. As a country committed to peace that has friendly relations and cooperation with all states, we advocate the use of dialogue and mediation and preventive diplomacy as the only way of guaranteeing international peace and security, and thus avoiding the escalation and spread of conflicts. This statement's based on the defense of principles and standards that guarantee peaceful coexistence. To this end, we reaffirm our respect for the UN Charter and the principles of sovereignty. Any act of violence against a state that is playing a mediating role is an attack on the principles that this organization stands for. We call for refraining from any warmongering rhetoric and to promote dialogue as the only way to reduce tensions and restore trust. We support the UN system as monitoring and its monitoring role in helping support mediating states. Peace and lasting security can only be possible through dialogue and adhering to the international obligations incumbent upon all parties. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole à la...
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bolivia. Thank you, President. We support the holding of this urgent debate, and we thank the High Commissioner for the information shared. Bolivia robustly condemns the strikes in Doha committed by Israel. These unacceptable actions are added to a list of unacceptable actions and violations of human rights and international humanitarian law that strive to undermine efforts for dialogue. The effects on the civilians are well known, and we also have seen reports of hunger in Gaza, attacks on doctors, on humanitarian workers, journalists, and others. We are daily witnesses to the intimidation and harassment committed against international actors that describe the reality of the Palestinian people. And now Israel has attacked a sovereign country that is trying to act as a mediator. These attacks are unacceptable, and they violate the basic principles of the UN Charter and damage multilateralism and diplomacy. The reaction of the international community in the face of these atrocities is core to try to ensure that we uphold the credibility of our system and the multilateral system. There should not be impunity. Bolivia expresses its full solidarity with the brother people and government of Qatar, and we would call for preservation of the dialogue and mediation efforts to try to arrive at a diplomatic solution to this crisis. Thank you, President.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iceland.
Mr. President, Iceland unequivocally condemns the Israeli airstrike in Doha on 9th September, a clear violation of international law and of the sovereignty of Qatar. Qatar has played an important role in facilitating mediation, working alongside Egypt and the United States in pursuit of a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages. To target representatives engaged in these sensitive negotiations is to undermine dialogue, destroy trust, and push prospects for progress further out of reach. Such actions can have grave repercussions for future attempts to resolve conflicts through negotiation. Rest assured, Iceland has condemned in the strongest terms the terrorist attack by Hamas on 7th October 2023 and calls for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. But at this critical juncture, what is required is restraint and full respect for international law. We urge all parties to return to diplomacy and to work in good faith toward a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Equally urgent is the need to ensure safe, unhindered and sustained humanitarian assistance to Gaza. Restrictions on humanitarian access are unacceptable. Iceland calls on Israel to uphold its humanitarian obligations as required under international law. The path forward must be one of dialogue, accountability and genuine commitment to a just and lasting political solution. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Costa Rica.
Señor Presidente.
President, we're grateful for the convening of this urgent debate and to the High Commissioner for his strongly worded message in the presence of the Deputy High Commissioner and the Minister of Cooperation from Qatar and the participation of this discussion. President, Costa Rica expresses its solidarity with the government and people of Qatar for the strikes by Israel against Hamas leaders in Qatari territory on the 9th of September. And this undermines international law and its territorial sovereignty. My country would reiterate its appeal to avoid an escalation of violence in the region, and we reaffirm our commitment to the respect for sovereignty of states, international law, and the peaceful settlement of conflicts through dialogue. Thank you very much.
Merci, ceci.
Thank you. That was the last speaker on our list of members. We now move to the list of observers of the Council. I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, President. Australia is deeply alarmed by the conflict in the Middle East. We join the UN Security Council and others in expressing our condemnation of Israel's strikes in Doha on 9 September. These strikes were a violation of Qatar's sovereignty. They have risked escalation across the region and imperiled work on a ceasefire. Qatar, alongside the US and Egypt, has been a tireless mediator. It has consistently called for dialogue with the aim of reaching what we all want: a ceasefire, the release of hostages, and the urgent flow of humanitarian aid. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is unacceptable. We do not want to see the threat of wider escalation looming over the region. We do not want to see the purposes and principles of the UN Charter undermined. Australia has been clear that Palestinian civilians cannot pay the price of defeating Hamas, nor should other countries that are facilitating dialogue, negotiation, and peaceful settlement of disputes. We urge the State of Qatar not to be deterred from its commendable efforts to mediate conflicts through peaceful means. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole au
Thank you. And now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, we welcome the convening of this urgent debate and welcome Her Excellency, the Minister of State for International Cooperation of the sisterly state of Qatar. The UAE has condemned in the strongest terms the blatant and cowardly Israeli attack that targeted Qatar. The UAE expresses its sincere condolences and solidarity with Qatar over the martyrdom of a member of Qatar's internal security force. We reaffirm our solidarity with Qatar and our steadfast support in confronting all threats to its security and stability. The Human Rights Council must remain steadfast in defending the universality of international law and the indivisibility of human rights. Any act of aggression that undermines state sovereignty contradicts the very foundations of which we are here to promote and protect. This attack represents a serious violation of the sovereignty of an Arab Gulf state and a UN member, in a clear breach of international law, and a dangerous escalation that further threatens regional stability and international peace, therefore undermining the very core principles of human rights. In conclusion, Mr. President, the region cannot afford to descend into further instability, fueled by aggressive rhetoric, hate speech, and abandonment of the principles enshrined in the UN Charter. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la...
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan.
In the name of God, our meeting today constitutes a sincere message of solidarity that human values and principles of human rights are incompatible with what the Israeli government is committing through its persistent behavior, aggression, and the catastrophic nature of its actions. The attack on Doha last week did not only target the mediation role based on the American president's proposal, but also a continued infringement on human rights over which this council has jurisdiction. International law is clear. What's required today is a halt to this recklessness, starting with practical steps by the Council to fulfill its role. Mr. President, we are advocates of peace that ensures security and stability for all. We stand on the side of truth, law, and legitimacy. We will continue on our just pursuit. The future of our region and the world should not be held hostage in reckless hands. The principles of human rights are there to protect every human being. In conclusion, the eyes of the free world look to this council today and every time to see its deeds, its defense of our shared values, and its application without exception. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Thank you, President. Turkey is aligned with the OIC statement and adds her voice firmly to the global condemnation of Israel's attack in Qatar. We thank the Honorable Minister of State of Qatar, the High Commissioner, and the Coordination Committee of Special Procedures for presenting the facts. Turkey reaffirms her staunch solidarity with Qatar. The heinous attack targeting Qatar's sovereignty and security is another flagrant violation of international law, as well as another clear evidence of Israel's expansionist policies and its adoption of terrorism as a state policy. Israel's continuing aggression and genocidal intent have been worsening the humanitarian crisis in Gaza even as we speak. Israel's violent policies are no longer confined to Palestine, but are destabilizing the wider region, including Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Yemen, Tunisia, and most recently Qatar, a mediator state. Mediators must be aided, not bombed. Israel's impunity poses a serious threat to international peace and security and the rules-based international order. Can we allow such contempt to international law to be the new normal defining our times? Turkey reiterates her call for accountability and for urgent, concrete measures by the international community to help end Israel's impunity and prevent further aggression and escalation. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la...
Thank you. And now call the distinguished representative of Finland.
Mr. President, Finland aligns itself with the EU statement. The Israeli strikes on Qatari territory are unacceptable. They constitute a clear violation of international law and breach Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The strike posed a serious threat to civilians, and we deeply regret the loss of civilian life and the injuries incurred. International law, including international human rights law, must always be respected. Finland condemns terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. The role of peace negotiations is critical, and only a sustainable peace based on a two-state solution will ensure the security of all parties in the region, including Israel. We pay tribute to Qatar for its long-term commitment and steadfast efforts in bringing peace to the region. All efforts to find a lasting and comprehensive peace in the region must continue. Dialogue is the only way to peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci, je...
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway.
And Norway aligns itself with a joint statement by Qatar and that of the European Union. We are deeply concerned about the latest escalation in the Middle East, the Israeli strikes in Qatar's capital, Doha, and the new offensive in Gaza. The Israeli attack in Doha was not only an attack on an urgent ongoing efforts to broker peace. It constitutes a clear violation of international law, violating Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Hamas representatives in Qatar were engaged in negotiations for a ceasefire in Gaza, including the release of Israeli hostages, facilitated by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. This attack will make it even more difficult to secure the so urgently needed ceasefire in Gaza. We urge the international community to stand together to protect the space for peace, diplomacy, and mediation. Our common security depends on it. President, in closing, we do not need another escalation now. We need more than ever an immediate end to the war in Gaza and a political solution to the long-standing conflict. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Egypt.
السيد الرئيس تدين مصر بأشد العبارات العدوان الإسرائيلي
President, we condemn most resolutely this Israeli airstrike on Qatar. This is a strike against a member state of the United Nations, a key peace broker aiming to bring an end to the war. But this is also a flagrant violation of international law. This is a new chapter in a long history of violations by Israel in Palestine and elsewhere. Attacks on innocent civilians. We're seeing the forced expulsions, the destruction of infrastructure, intimidations of people, and depriving them of basic necessities needed for life. We are facing a systematic policy which uses excessive force to impose a fait accompli. Egypt affirms its full solidarity with the State of Qatar, and we call upon this Council and the international community to adopt a firm position to stop Israeli strikes in the region and to protect civilians. It is time to bring an end to the international impunity that Israel is enjoying, which encourages it to persist in these attacks against the peoples and communities in the most flagrant way possible, violating resolutions and international law. We must hold people accountable for these crimes. The silence of the international community is no longer acceptable. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. We wholly condemn Israel's strikes on Doha. We stand in full and unwavering solidarity with Qatar and extend our condolences for the Qatari personnel tragically killed and injured. As the High Commissioner stressed last week, such actions pose serious risks to mediation efforts in Gaza and risks further escalation in the region. The UK firmly supports the efforts of Qatar, the US, and Egypt to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza, to secure the release of hostages and to end this conflict. We urge all parties to re-engage meaningfully to reach a negotiated deal. Mr. President, the conflict in Gaza continues to have a devastating impact. The hostages have endured unimaginable suffering for almost 2 years. Palestinian civilians face repeated displacement, death, and injury. And it is abhorrent that famine is unfolding in parts of Gaza City. We reiterate our unequivocal condemnation of Hamas and the atrocities committed on October 7th. Hamas must release all hostages and can play no part in the future governance of Gaza. However, the strikes on Qatar are unacceptable and will do nothing to deliver peace in the Middle East or to safeguard Israel's long-term security. A political solution is the only way to achieve lasting peace and security for Palestinians and Israelis alike. Thank you.
Merci, je donne.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank you for convening this urgent debate of the Council. We warmly welcome Her Excellency Qatar's Minister of State for International Cooperation and thank her for briefing the Council on the human rights impacts emanating from Israel's strike on the State of Qatar. Pakistan condemns in the strongest possible terms the illegal and unprovoked Israeli aggression against the brotherly State of Qatar. Nearly 2 years into its genocidal campaign in Gaza, Israel's latest crime against Qatar is part of a broader pattern of wanton aggression in the region. It is rooted in utter disregard for international law and denial of inherent human dignity of the victims. Qatar's role in advancing ceasefire talks merits the commendation of the world. Instead, Israel's attack on mediators has undermined diplomacy and peaceful settlement, as well as the aspirations of all peoples in the region to live in peace. While regional countries are working to foster a culture of peace, Israel only seeks to perpetuate the culture of impunity. Pakistan stands in unwavering solidarity with Qatar and fully supports its right to defend its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the safety of all persons within its territory. We reaffirm our support for a just and lasting peace in the Middle East and the end to Israel's prolonged occupation of Palestine and other Arab lands. The carnage in Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, must be brought to an end. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Israeli actions are no longer sporadic violations. They constitute a systematic behavior based on the indiscriminate killing, suffocating siege, premeditated starvation, and forced displacements In violation of all international norms and laws, the treacherous attack against Qatar is only a new episode in a long series of crimes perpetrated by Israel. We stand firmly by Qatar and we condemn this treacherous attack. It is not an attack on one state, it's an attack on the security of the whole region. It undermines the mediation efforts and diplomatic efforts aimed at achieving a ceasefire in Gaza, the respect of the UN Charter, state sovereignty, IHL, and international human rights law is not a luxury. It is a necessity and a commitment. We need a serious international move to put an end to this recklessness, far from any double standards or selectivity. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you. We condemn in the strongest terms the treacherous Israeli aggression against Doha. It's a direct threat to the safety of civilians and a flagrant violation of the sovereignty of Qatar and international law. This is not an isolated aggression. It's part of an Israeli systematic approach aiming at destabilizing the security of the region. It aims at undermining the efforts that wish to achieve peace. This aggression is an episode in a series of attacks by Israel, be it in Palestine, where they continue killing, destruction, displacement, as well as in Syria, where we see the continuous attacks in a breach of sovereignty and territorial integrity. We reaffirm our full solidarity with Qatar and call on the international community to shoulder its legal and moral responsibilities and to take a firm stance against these serious violations in order to protect civilians, preserve international and regional peace and security. We must take concrete steps that hold Israel to account. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sweden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sweden fully aligns with the EU statement. Israel's attack in Doha on the 9th of September was unacceptable. The attack violated Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity and was in clear violation of international law. The attack risks further destabilizing the region and impeding the joint Qatari, Egyptian, and American undertaking for a ceasefire and the release of hostages in Gaza. We welcome Qatar's commitment to continue its mediation efforts despite these attacks. Sweden's demands on the terrorist organization Hamas remain clear. Release all the hostages and disarm. There can be no place for Hamas in future governance of Gaza. To conclude, Mr. President, any further escalation must be avoided. We continue to call for restraint and diplomacy, and Sweden stands in full solidarity with Qatar and the Qatari people. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Libya.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, President. First, we'd like to welcome Miriam Bentali Sinad, Her Excellency, Ministry of State and International Cooperation from Qatar. We are thankful for the update. President, my country condemns this shameful aggression by Israel against a brother country. We stand with the Qatari people and government, and we support Qatar in all ways necessary. This latest Israeli attack, Mr. President, shows how this occupying power flouts international law and all conventions. It uses force in international relations, and this reflects the impunity that just encourages Israel to commit such crimes. President, targeting Qatar, a state that is acting as a mediator, shows that this state does not wish to have peace, but rather continues to mete out this barbaric war against civilians. It is indescribable, bloody aggression and war. And there are those who are complicit. We would call for all concrete measures possible to halt this occupying power, also through diplomatic and political sanctions with the prohibition of the export of arms. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. President. Portugal aligns itself with the EU statement. Portugal strongly condemns the airstrike carried out in Doha by Israel. This unprovoked attack constitutes a serious violation of international law against the territorial integrity and sovereignty of a UN member state and further heightens the risk of escalation in the region. We deeply regret the Qatari civilian casualties and express our full solidarity with the victims, their families, and the Qatari authorities. Respect for international humanitarian law and international human rights law is not negotiable, and accountability must ensue. No efforts towards peace can succeed while violence continues. We very much value the role Qatar has played and continues to play in the release of hostages and in efforts to facilitate a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Gaza. Palestinians, Israelis, and those living in neighboring states must be spared from further suffering. Portugal once again reiterates the urgency of an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the unconditional release of all hostages, and of ensuring unimpeded access of humanitarian assistance at scale into and throughout Gaza. The two-state solution is crucial to achieve a lasting peace and stability, not just in Gaza, but in the region, and we call on all parties to refrain from any actions that may hinder the path to peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I recognize the distinguished representative of India.
Mr. President, India is deeply concerned about the recent attacks in Doha and their impact on the security situation in the region. We unequivocally condemn the violation of the sovereignty of Qatar. Such actions threaten peace, stability, and security, not only in the region, but across the world. India firmly believes that differences must be resolved peacefully through dialogue and diplomacy in full conformity with the principles of the UN Charter and international law. Any escalation must be avoided, and respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states must be upheld. We strongly urge restraint and diplomacy to ensure that peace and security in the region are not compromised. Mr. President, we stand firmly in support of peace and stability in the region and against terrorism in any form or manifestation. We call upon the international community to remain united in efforts towards attaining peace and upholding the rule of law. As a close partner, India reiterates its solidarity with the Qatar and its people. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
السيد الرئيس للأسف أنا لا
President, unfortunately, it'll be no surprise to tell you that you will have another special session to review another attack of a similar level against other victims. We've got to ask ourselves, how will that attack happen? Or how will the aggressor surprise us with new criminal techniques that perhaps we haven't thought of? President, the State of Qatar has always been at the forefront of diplomatic efforts to try to find solutions to conflicts across the world. Qatar has gone to great lengths to try to achieve this noble and humanitarian goal. And yet, this Israeli attack, and particularly against this philosophy of values, which is the bedrock on which the UN was built. This council needs to clearly take on its responsibilities by condemning and bringing to book the perpetrators of this attack. That is tantamount to an aggression against all persons who wish to live in serenity and peace. We condemn the daily attacks by the occupying power in flagrant violation of the UN Security Council resolution, because the Palestinian people are deprived of this safety.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
يعرب العراق عن استنكاره وإدانته الشديدين
We firmly condemn the brutal aggression led by the occupying power against our brother country, Qatar. Its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, and its people were attacked. The leaders of Hamas were attacked, and this aggression is part of the systematic warmongering policy embraced by the occupying power, and this hampers mediating efforts embraced by Qatar to endeavor to bring about an end to this war against Palestinians. Iraq reiterates its stance in favor of the Qatari people and its efforts. And we stand in solidarity in support of Qatar. We must ensure that the perpetrators are held accountable for these acts. It violates the UN Charter. And this could, of course, affect other countries on different unfounded precepts. Thank you. Peru expresses its deep concern in the face of the attack by Israel against Qatar. This is a serious threat to peace and international security, and is also a violation of international law. Peru reaffirms its steadfast commitment to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, in particular, territorial integrity and sovereignty. Similarly, we underscore the obligation to guarantee at all times protection and security for civilians. In this space, Peru appeals to all parties involved to immediately halt hostilities in the Gaza Strip and to avoid any military escalation that could deteriorate the situation and lead to human suffering as well as international insecurity. Peru believes that the only route to peace is dialogue, diplomacy, and the strict respect for international law. Thank you very much. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brunei Darussalam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brunei Darussalam fully supports the convening of this urgent debate and aligns itself with the statement delivered by Pakistan on behalf of the OIC. We draw attention to the holding of the Emergency Arab Islamic Summit held in Doha yesterday and underscore our full support on its outcome. We stand in full solidarity with the government and the people of the State of Qatar. Mr. President, Brunei Darussalam reiterates our strong condemnation of Israel's attack on the State of Qatar, which constitutes a grave and unacceptable violation of international law and the UN Charter, in particular, the fundamental principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. Such violation poses a dangerous threat to regional security and stability and undermines ongoing efforts to achieve long-lasting peace, including the ongoing negotiations for ceasefire in Gaza, in which Qatar continues to play a pivotal role as mediator. The entrenched impunity long afforded to Israel has enabled the continuation of its acts of aggression and emboldened its persistent disregard for international law. This must be stopped. Such violations must be addressed and accountability and justice must be upheld. The very credibility of the UN and the multilateral system is at stake. We urgently call on the international community to take firm and decisive action to compel Israel to cease all illegal acts and violence that endanger both regional and global peace and stability. We also reaffirm that the plight of the Palestinian people lies at the core of the conflict in the Middle East and must not be ignored. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bahrain.
Thank you, Mr. President. This session takes place at a critical moment. International law, human rights, basic freedoms, efforts to promote peace and security are facing a real threat. The international community must work on abiding by human rights. We must make sure that all states respect these laws. We have expressed our condemnation of the attack on Qatar on the 19th of September. It is an attack on sovereignty, territorial integrity, as well as the UN Charter. We express our condolences to Qatar, its government and people. The Israeli aggression on Qatar is a grave threat to stability in the region and efforts of peace. Qatar and its partners, Egypt and the US, have been working tirelessly to achieve a ceasefire and the release of hostages. In conclusion, we fully stand by Qatar in any measures it takes to protect its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and its people. We call on continuing diplomatic efforts to achieve peace, and I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
Thank you, Chair. Ireland aligns with the EU statement. Ireland is deeply concerned, Chair, by the military aggression by Israel on Qatar, an attack on a country engaged in efforts to mediate a ceasefire agreement for the war in Gaza. Such actions, or rather this action, is a violation of Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity and a breach of international law. The action undermines efforts to reach a ceasefire agreement and the release of the remaining hostages, which must be a priority for the international community. We call on the international community to support continued dialogue and to continue to support the efforts by the mediators, Egypt, Qatar and the United States, to reach an immediate and permanent ceasefire, secure the unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas, and allow immediate and unimpeded humanitarian access at scale into Gaza. We urge all parties to refrain from actions that jeopardize mediation channels or regional stability, and we call on Israel to respect international law, international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Ireland will continue to work with partners in the international community to ensure accountability for grave breaches of international law. Chairman, we must find a way to move away from the path of violence towards a durable peace. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I recognize the distinguished representative of Paraguay.
Señor Presidente.
President, in the face of the events on the 9th of September, my delegation urges all parties involved to make a commitment to inclusive, constructive dialogue that will help to forge the way to lasting peace in the region. Now, of course, we cannot deny the seriousness of these events. The fight against terrorism is a shared responsibility by all international actors who are committed to peace. On this point, the government of the Republic of Paraguay has been categorical. As such, recently we recognized Hamas as a terrorist organization due to its responsibility or its liability in violations of peace, human rights, and security for the international community. We reaffirm our firm, unmovable position in combating terrorism in all its forms. As such, we value the crucial role of the government of Qatar as mediator. This is why my country did not join the proposed joint declaration. We hail the efforts of the international community that is striving to respond urgently, and we also commend the diplomatic efforts that are helping forge this way to peace. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Rwanda.
Mr. President, Rwanda commends the Council for convening this urgent debate. We stand in solidarity with the government and the people of the State of Qatar. We unequivocally condemn the deadly attack in Qatar launched by Israel, which endangered civilians and further inflamed an already fragile situation. Rwanda reaffirms the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security of all member states. The UN Charter, international law, and the peaceful settlement of dispute must guide all actions. Any use of force against these principles weakens collective security. We underline the indispensable role of mediator states in preventing escalation and paving the way to durable political solutions. In this spirit, we commend Qatar's constructive engagement in the Great Lakes region, consistent with the African Union framework and complementary to the Washington Peace Agreement, to facilitate inter-Congolese dialogue aimed at ending violence, safeguarding human rights, and paving the way for a comprehensive political resolution. Mr. President, we invite the Council to recommend practical measures to safeguard mediators and mediating states and to ensure accountability under international law. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I recognize the distinguished representative of Djibouti.
Monsieur le Président,
President, my delegation would like to thank the High Commissioner for its statement and the convening of this urgent meeting.
of the group which it belongs to, and expresses its deep indignation, condemning in the strongest terms the airstrike carried out on 9 September by Israel against the State of Qatar, in blatant violation of international law, the Charter of the UN, and Qatari sovereignty and integrity. This heinous and unprecedented act represents a particularly serious escalation, posing direct threats to regional peace and stability, as the attack against Qatar constitutes a direct threat to collective security and peace and targets the stability of the entire region. This military attack is all the more shocking given that the State of Qatar and its authorities have consistently been at the forefront of mediation efforts aimed at facilitating negotiations towards establishing a ceasefire to the ongoing Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people. Djibouti expresses its full solidarity and support to the government and the brotherly people of Qatar, and calls on the international community, particularly the UN Security Council, to assume its responsibilities to put an end to this violation, prevent the recurrence of such acts, and avert any further dangerous escalation in the region. And I thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We strongly condemn the Israeli attack on Doha, another grave violation of international law targeting a crucial mediator between Israel and Hamas. This attack is part of a consistent pattern documented extensively by this Council of defying international mechanisms. Security Council resolutions, binding orders of the ICJ, and the mandates of this body are being disregarded, fostering a pervasive sense of impunity. The consequences of this conflict are a profound human rights catastrophe. Civilians, amongst them the youngest ones, are starved and killed. Humanitarian and medical workers and those who report from Gaza are brutally attacked. The erosion of human dignity in Gaza is devastating. Now, even peace negotiators are targeted. But let this be a clear reminder: hostages are freed through diplomacy, not destruction. Peace cannot be achieved by undermining peacemakers. We condemn the attack on Qatar's sovereignty and commend its mediation efforts. Nobody is above the law. We appeal for a renewed commitment to negotiations in good faith. Impunity and further aggression are not the answer. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la
Thank you. I recognize the distinguished representative of Oman. President, the Sultanate of Oman condemns the brutal Israeli attack on the brother nation of Qatar in flagrant violation of the sovereignty of a member states of the United Nations and international law. This attack is not only restricted to Qatari territory, but it affected one of the main mediators in the conflict in Gaza, and this threatens international stability and diplomatic efforts to try to bring about an end to the bloodshed. This jeopardizes the credibility and the success of any peace process. We reiterate our solidarity with the brother state of Qatar and call on the international community to remain robust in its response, to call for accountability for these perpetrators and to combat impunity. The Sultanate of Oman believes that the silence of the international community in the face of such acts undermines multilateralism and would allow perpetrators to remain on this path. We need to ensure the respect for international law and preserve all efforts for peace.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chad. President, Chad aligns itself with the statements made by the groups to which it belongs, and we hail the convening of this debate. The government of Chad expresses its outrage and reiterates its condemnation of this Israeli attack against Qatar, which unfortunately claimed a number of lives. We would call for the respect for international law, the UN Charter, and sovereignty of states. Chad reiterates its solidarity and support for the authorities and all of the Qatari people. Chad would call on the international community to take efforts to prevent any escalation which might jeopardize peace and stability in the region. Chad hails the responsible and wise stance taken by the State of Qatar and would urge it to continue its efforts for mediation in spite of the increasing tension. Dialogue must prevail. There is no military solution to the conflict in the Middle East. And, Mr. President, there will be no military solution to any kind of conflict in our world. Chad would advocate the continuation of a political process that involves all actors concerned, as well as a de-escalation of hostilities to avoid any worsening of the situation. Thank you, President. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nigeria.
Mr. President, the federal government of Nigeria expresses deep concern over the Israeli airstrike on 9 September 2025 in Doha, Qatar. Nigeria underscores the primacy of respecting the sovereignty of all nations, adhering to international law, particularly in matters involving the use of force across borders. This development raises serious concern about regional stability and the prospect of ongoing diplomatic efforts aimed at resolving the Israeli-Palestine conflict. Nigeria acknowledges Qatar's long-standing role in fostering dialogue and mediation in the region. In this context, Nigeria urges all parties to exercise maximum restraint, avoid escalation, and recommit to peaceful engagement. We extend our heartfelt sympathy to all those affected by the incident and reiterate our unwavering support for initiatives that promote de-escalation, dialogue, and durable peace. Finally, Nigeria remains steadfast in its commitment to working alongside members of the international community within the framework of the United Nations and other multilateral fora to advance peace, security, and the rule of law in the Middle East and beyond. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Somalia.
Mr. President, Somalia expresses its deepest concern and firm condemnation of that armed attack launched by Israel against the State of Qatar on 9 September. Such acts represent a serious breach of international law and the UN Charter and the core principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity that underpins this Council's work. We are particularly alarmed that the attack targeted a state engaged in mediation and humanitarian dialogue, undermining not only threatening peace efforts, but also weakening the protection of civilians, obstructs humanitarian access, and risks discouraging states from contributing to conflict prevention and resolution. We therefore welcome the statement of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the condemnation expressed by many states, and we echo the call for full respect of international humanitarian law and the protection of mediating states under all circumstances. Somalia reaffirms its solidarity with Qatar and urges the international community to ensure that no state is above the law and those who seek peace are supported, not targeted. Mr. President, we must move beyond mere condemnation and enforce international law in order to achieve a lasting peace and stability in the region. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. And now call the distinguished representative of New Zealand.
Mr. President, New Zealand is deeply concerned by Israel's strikes in Doha. Our foreign minister has publicly said that Israel's actions violate Qatar's sovereignty, risk escalation, and undermine efforts by Qatar, the United States, and Egypt to end the conflict in Gaza. The strikes take us further away from peace. We need an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and full humanitarian access into Gaza. All parties must abide by their obligations under international law, including the provisional measures ordered by the International Court of Justice. The violence needs to stop. A permanent end to the fighting must be found. New Zealand will continue to advocate for the parties to urgently work towards a two-state solution. This is the best path to a durable and lasting peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Je donne la...
Thank you. And now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sri Lanka aligns with the joint statement by Qatar. Sri Lanka welcomes the convening of the urgent debate by the Human Rights Council to discuss the unprovoked attacks against Qatar on 9 September 2025. Mr. President, Sri Lanka condemns the attacks on Qatar, which risk further escalating volatility and undermining regional security. Sri Lanka strongly emphasizes the need to exercise restraint and the importance of employing dialogue and diplomacy rather than military aggression over sovereign countries, while upholding the universally accepted international norms and laws. The Human Rights Council has a special duty to address the devastating impact of continuing violence and hostility on the people in the Middle East region, especially the dire humanitarian situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. In this context, Sri Lanka calls on the Council to avoid double standards in its approach and the treatment of situations of human rights violations, and ensure that the rights of all are promoted and protected equally, regardless of geography and other considerations. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine.
Thank you. We strongly condemn Israel's aggression against Qatar, which constitutes a blatant violation of international law and the UN Charter, as well as an attack on the sovereignty of a UN member state. Even more alarming, this assault targeted members of the negotiating team working toward a ceasefire in Gaza, where Israel continues to commit genocide, findings further reinforced this morning by the COI. This further demonstrates that Israel, a government composed of war criminals as identified by the ICC, has never been interested in peace. This attack did not occur in a vacuum. Since its inception, Israel has consistently violated international law, committing the most egregious crimes with total impunity. Decades of international inaction have directly fueled this barbaric attack and the wider instability in the region. This is the inevitable consequence when impunity replaces justice. What is urgently required now is concrete action against Israel and all those complicit in its crimes. This must include sanctions, arms embargo, and genuine accountability measures. The international legal system is being reduced to a tool of injustice. To prevent this, member states must end the selective and discriminatory application of the law and act in full accordance with the very obligations they claim to uphold. It's now clear that no state is immune when accountability is applied selectively, where for some, the law is enforced, but when it comes to...
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Estonia.
Estonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Estonia aligns with the European Union statement. The 9th of September airstrikes by Israel against the sovereign state of Qatar are unacceptable. Estonia underlines the primacy and universality of international law. It applies equally in all situations without exception. We are concerned by the alarming trend of its gradual erosion, which undermines not only the rules-based international order, but also the security of all nations. Estonia expresses its full support and solidarity with the State of Qatar. We condemn breaches of sovereignty and territorial integrity in every circumstance. In this context, let me recall that last week, the Russian Federation violated the airspace of Poland, another reminder that principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity must be defended consistently and everywhere. Estonia stands firmly for accountability in cases of violations of international law. There can be no selective application of justice. Perpetrators must be held responsible wherever and whenever violations occur. To conclude, respect for international law and principles of UN Charter are essential in assuring peace, stability, and uphold human rights. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. And now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Mr. President, Malaysia aligns itself with the statement of the OIC. Malaysia strongly condemns the Israeli military aggression on the state of Qatar on 9 September 2025. This heinous act is an assault on Qatar's sovereignty, a flagrant violation of international law and the UN Charter, and threatens regional peace and security. We further condemn Israel's attempt to manipulate counter-terrorism narratives to justify its illegal and unlawful attack. Such claims are an utter distortion, undermining Qatar's role as a mediator and sabotaging ongoing peace efforts. It is evident that Israel blatantly disregards international peace and security, emboldened by its unchecked impunity. The unlawful attack on Qatar not only recklessly endangered civilian lives, but also severely compromised crucial diplomatic efforts and further destabilized the already volatile region. Malaysia urges this Council and the international community to strongly condemn Israel's unjustified actions and hold it fully accountable for the attack on Qatar and the atrocities committed on the Palestinians in Gaza. Accountability must move beyond mere rhetoric and be premised on action. Those responsible for violations of international law must not be allowed to act with impunity. The failure to act decisively will only embolden the Israeli Zionist regime. Malaysia stands in full solidarity with the government and the people of the state of Qatar, reaffirming our unwavering support for their sovereignty, territorial integrity, security, and stability. Thank you.
Thank you. I remind you to please, when you refer to governments of member countries, to use the terms that are usually used in a UN context. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore.
Mr. President, Israel's airstrikes in Doha on 9 September 2025 are a blatant violation of the sovereignty of Qatar. We're also alarmed by reports that the attack happened in a residential area near schools and embassies, resulting in the loss of life, including a member of Qatar's internal security forces, and injuring civilians as well. Mr. President, Singapore has consistently taken a principled position in support of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries. All states, big or small, must observe international law and the principles of the UN Charter. For a small state like Singapore, this is an existential issue. The attack is also an egregious and dangerous action that undermines ongoing negotiations on a ceasefire and the release of hostages in Gaza, as well as Qatar's tireless efforts to secure such an agreement. Mr. President, we call on all parties to avoid escalating the situation. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la...
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Philippines deplores the attack in Doha on the 9th of September, which constitutes a grave violation of international law, particularly the fundamental principles of state sovereignty and territorial integrity. These principles are the bedrock of international order, peace, and security, which are indispensable for the realization and full enjoyment of human rights by all. They are sacrosanct and must be respected by all states, big or small, at all times. The Philippines recalls states' solemn obligation under the UN Charter and the 1982 Manila Declaration on the peaceful settlement of international disputes to resolve conflicts by peaceful means and to refrain from any action that does not advance the cause of peace and the rule of law. The Philippines stresses the urgent need for parties to the conflict in Gaza to agree to an immediate and permanent ceasefire, uphold obligations under international humanitarian law, ensure the protection of civilians, and work towards a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace in the Middle East. The Philippines stands in solidarity with the people of Qatar and with friends and partners in the international community who walk the path of peace, adhere to the rule of law, and respect human rights, bound together by our common humanity and the pursuit of the common good. Thank you.
Merci, je donne...
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Mauritania.
تتبنى موريتانيا البيانات الصادرة باسم المجموعات التي
President, we align ourselves with the statement made by the groups that we belong to, and we most categorically condemn the Israeli attack on the capital of Qatar, violating the sovereignty of this country and international peace and security. We stand in solidarity with the people and state of Qatar. This brutal aggression targeted a mediator who works tirelessly to find an agreement to bring an end to the genocide that the Palestinian people are subjected to. This is a dangerous precedent and yet another example of the lack of interest that Israel has in seeking peace. Israel is persisting in its genocide, in its war, and this undermines the peace and security internationally as well as regionally. It is against our collective security interests. Israel is continuing to violate international laws, and this is why we call upon the international community to use all possible measures to ensure respect of international law and to maintain the credibility of the international order. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole à la...
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Luxembourg.
President, Luxembourg aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. At the outset, allow me to express Luxembourg's full solidarity with Qatar. We condemn the attack of 9 September by Israel, which targeted the Hamas leadership in Doha and killed 6 people in a residential area. This attack is a clear violation of Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and thus of international law, setting a dangerous precedent in a conflict that is already spiraling out of control and taking on a regional dimension. Given the ongoing negotiation mediated by Qatar and Egypt between Israel and Hamas, this development gravely jeopardizes the chances of securing a negotiated release of the hostages, whose situation must remain central to our efforts, alongside achieving a ceasefire in Gaza. We remain strongly committed to the two-state solution. Luxembourg supports Qatar's determination to continue this mediation role and urges all parties to refrain from any actions that may jeopardize negotiations and regional stability. The role and position of mediators must be safeguarded by the international community, as their integrity is key to the peaceful resolution of conflicts around the world. It is imperative to avoid any further escalation and to ensure that negotiations are conducted in good faith. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Tunisia. President, we subscribed to the statements made by the groups we belong to. We condemn the cowardly attack carried out by the occupying power on 9th of September on the state of Qatar in flagrant violation of international law. Tunisia is in solidarity with our brotherly country of Qatar and against this Zionist brutal aggression. The occupying power persists in its belligerent behavior. After 2 years of genocide against the Palestinian people, our brotherly people, we see now that Israel is attacking other Muslim Arab countries, including Qatar, which is playing a mediating role to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. We reiterate our position of principle in favor of the Palestinian people, supporting them until they can regain their legitimate rights, that is the creation of an independent sovereign state in Palestine with Jerusalem as capital. We call upon the international community, and in particular the Security Council of the United Nations, to assume its legal and moral responsibility to act rapidly to bring an end to the murder and terrorism of the occupying power in the Palestinian territories.
Belarus.
I call the distinguished representative of Belarus. Thank you, President. Belarus is concerned about the militarization of foreign policy and international relations in general, which could be seen, amongst others, in the increasing use of force instead of dialogue and negotiations for the peaceful settlement of disputes, and also in the military attacks in violation of the UN Charter and international law on sovereign states, which are not parties to conflicts and which are carrying out mediation roles and peace-building roles. We support the mediation efforts of the State of Qatar. And also we would express our hope for a rapid freeing of hostages and an end to the Palestine-Israeli conflict. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran condemns the military aggression launched by the Israeli regime against the broader nation of Qatar. This aggression sends a clear message, not to the regime whose history is defined by systematic genocide, repeated aggression, and hollow pride in the commission of these crimes, but to us as a stark warning that because of our inaction and passivity and our failure to protect moral and legal principles, an evil entity has been allowed to destroy global security and order. This apartheid regime neither respects the law nor the language of civilized nations, nor does it believe in negotiation, peace, or stability. The Israeli regime halted its genocidal campaign for only 2 weeks, and that solely when confronted by the Iranian armed forces. If the international community fails to respond decisively, Israel's aggression and expansion will continue unchecked, spreading like a cancer and threatening all neighboring nations. We are duly bound to defend our people and humanity by any means necessary. Finally, once again, we reaffirm our full solidarity with the people and government of Qatar. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I'd like to remind you once again that in this room, in the Human Rights Council, we need to respect the mandate of the Human Rights Council, to respect the tone and language which is in line with the United Nations values when referring to countries. Thank you. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. Thank you, President. We firmly condemn the attack by Israel on the 9th of September against the residential area in Doha. The target of this was the high-ranking membership of the Palestinian movement Hamas. Extreme concern is raised by the fact that the Israeli Air Force carried out an attack on a residential district where there are embassies, residential buildings, busy roads, and some schools and kindergartens. This massive airstrike in the heart of the working day could have led to a lot more casualties. The grave violation of the sovereignty of the state and the serious threat to innocent citizens can have no justification. We fully share the UN Secretary General's condemnation of the attack in Qatar and the attacks on the territorial integrity of an independent state. It is particularly cynical, as though it's one of the mediators between the Palestinians and Israelis over recent months and has tirelessly been working to bring an end to the bloodshed in Gaza and to free all of those who are held against their will. In this way, it was an attack not only on Qatar as a state which is not involved in the conflict and the sovereign state, but also an attack on all mediators who are seeking a diplomatic solution to Palestine-Israeli conflict. And it's clear that the Israeli forces should see serious consequences here, as we're seeing security concerns raised in Gaza and the whole of the Middle East. And we call upon the Israeli side to stop such acts.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Senegal.
Monsieur le Président.
President, Senegal aligns itself with the statements by those groups it belongs to. The highest authorities of my country have expressed their great concern following the attacks of these Israeli forces recently in Doha against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar, a country which is working to bring peace between the parties to the conflict. This is a grave attack on international law and a threat to international peace and security. We express our support and our solidarity to the government and people of Qatar. Pursuant to the fundamental principles of the United Nations Charter, my calls imperatively for international law to prevail in interstate relations, particularly in the current context where multilateralism and international rule and order based on the rule of law are being sorely tested. The drama we are seeing in Gaza is clearly witness to this. We reiterate our support to dialogue between nations here in the Council to seek a peaceful settlement of disputes which can ensure peace and stability and prosperity which are vital for the full enjoyment of human rights. Thank you. Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ukraine deems unacceptable the strike carried out on September 9 against the capital of the State of Qatar, Doha, targeting a densely populated area where, among others, foreign diplomatic missions are located. The strike on the territory of a state that acts as a mediator in the peace negotiations to resolve the situation in the Gaza Strip is a gross violation of international law and contradicts the efforts of the international community for de-escalation in the region. We express solidarity with the government and the people of the State of Qatar and emphasize the inadmissibility of violating of its sovereignty. Ukraine supports the efforts of the Qatari side aimed at achieving a sustainable ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and resolving the situation through diplomatic means. We are convinced of the need for all parties to refrain from actions that could negatively affect the mediation efforts of the State of Qatar and lead to additional aggravation of the security situation in the region. We call on all parties to immediately cease violence and return to the negotiation process. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Thank you, President. Venezuela, through a press release on the 9th of September, robustly condemned the cowardly attack of Israel against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar. This aggression is an act of state terrorism and a flagrant violation of international law and a challenge or a threat to the principles of peaceful coexistence of states. This modus operandi has become a method by Israel and the US to violate international law and the basic principles of coexistence, using diplomacy to bring about negotiations in good faith and then shelling the country. This happened with Iran in the negotiations on the nuclear program, and now Qatar, the mediator in this Israeli genocide in Palestine, attacking the negotiating team that was trying to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza shows once again the real nature of Israel. Far from trying to find peace, it is destabilizing peace, and the damage inflicted by Israel on this country is hard to calculate. A new doctrine against peace has emerged, and the mediator is susceptible to any act of aggression, becoming an enemy to this party in the conflict that it was trying to bring an end to. Venezuela reaffirms its commitment to peace and self-determination of peoples and defense of international law. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative
of
Hungary.
And Hungary aligns itself with the EU statement. As a friend of Qatar, Hungary stands in support of Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity following airstrikes last week targeting Hamas leaders in Doha, and expresses its full solidarity with the government and the people of Qatar. We highly value Qatar's mediation efforts and are grateful for its role in securing the release of hostages taken by Hamas following the horrific attacks against Israel on 7 October 2023. Mr. President, the conflict in the Middle East has been a matter of deep concern and has captured the attention of the international community. Hungary reaffirms its support to efforts aiming at achieving sustainable peace and stresses the importance of diplomatic engagement and dialogue in order to restore regional stability. At the same time, Hungary has not accepted and will not accept any hostile approach towards Israel in any international fora. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jamaica.
Thank you, Mr. President. The delegation of Jamaica laments the developments which have necessitated this urgent debate today. The Jamaican government reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as the peaceful settlement of disputes as enshrined in the UN Charter. For this reason, and consistent with CARICOM's statement on the matter, Jamaica strongly condemns the recent Israeli airstrike on residential premises in Doha, even as the State of Qatar was expending diplomatic efforts towards mediation for a ceasefire in Gaza. This act represents a grave violation of international law and a disregard for international norms and principles. Jamaica welcomes the UNGA's recent endorsement of the New York Declaration for the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine. In this regard, we reiterate our call for an immediate, unconditional, and sustained ceasefire, the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance to Gaza, and the safe return of all hostages. We remain steadfast in our condemnation of violence against civilians and reaffirm our commitment to a two-state solution as the only viable path to lasting peace in the region. Jamaica joins the international community in urging restraint, dialogue, and respect for international law as essential pillars for regional and global stability. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Armenia.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Armenia is deeply concerned about the targeting of residential areas in Doha, which has resulted in civilian casualties and significant material damage. The fundamental principles of the UN Charter serve as a solid foundation for our position. The preservation of peace and security crucially reside upon the respect for territorial integrity, state sovereignty and independence. Furthermore, international humanitarian law requires that civilians and civilian objects be protected at all times. In the immediate term, priority must be to end hostilities and silence weapons in order to prevent further human suffering. It is equally important to avoid any actions that could lead to escalation or further destabilize regional security and stability. The Human Rights Council has the responsibility to approach such matters with impartiality, ensuring that the promotion and protection of human rights remain at the heart of our collective efforts. Armenia considers that the most effective and sustainable path to peace, security, and the full enjoyment of human rights lies in dialogue based on multilateral cooperation and respect of international law. Thank you. Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Uruguay.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, President. Uruguay condemns the attacks by Israel in the city of Doha, Qatar, and expresses its solidarity with the Qatari government and people. These attacks are a flagrant violation of international law and of the sovereignty and security of Qatar, and worsen the already appalling security situation in the Middle East. Furthermore, these attacks have a clear impact on protection of human rights and deserve the attention of this Council. Uruguay reiterates its urgent call to spare no efforts and to ensure that there's no undermining of efforts to achieve a negotiated solution to the crisis in Gaza. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. And I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of Yemen. Thank you, President. The Republic of Yemen condemns most vigorously the cowardly Israeli attack on our brotherly country of Qatar, violating principles of international law and order. This is a cowardly attack against the sovereignty of a state and jeopardizes regional and international peace and security. Israel is enjoying immunity, and it is attacking other countries, such as my country, Yemen, where infrastructure, civilian sites, airports, and airplanes have been targeted and destroyed. These acts of aggression are unprecedented escalation of the situation, and this is in violation of the United Nations charters, in violation of the principles of international law and international humanitarian law. We are condemning how the occupying Israeli forces are pursuing such policies, and we condemn these aggressions, and we call upon the international community to assume its responsibilities, its legal and moral responsibilities, by taking the necessary measures to bring an end to these repeated attacks and aggressions and holding to account the perpetrators of such crimes. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda.
Mr. President, Uganda condemns the attack in Doha on 9 September 2025 and regrets the loss of civilian life and destruction of property. The attack constitutes a violation of Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity contrary to international law, and we stand in solidarity with Qatar. Any further escalation in the region is of deep concern to us, which could have grave consequences. We therefore call for de-escalation. Qatar, alongside the United States and Egypt, has played a vital role in mediation efforts in the region, including the release of hostages, efforts which we fully support. We note that strike could imperil negotiations, including for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, and urge Qatar to continue playing its mediation role. This situation is a reminder of the urgency for a just and comprehensive peace in the Middle East. We urge the international community and the parties in particular to exert all efforts for peace based on relevant United Nations resolutions to achieve a two-state solution with two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Azerbaijan aligned to the OIC statement. In national capacity, we wish to add that 9 September attack on the state of Qatar causes deep concern. We express our full support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar and call for strict adherence to the UN Charter and international law to avoid further aggravation of regional situation. Since the eruption of the ongoing crisis, Qatar has been making pivotal efforts to find a negotiated solution. We highly appreciate and commend Qatar's effort to facilitate negotiations between the parties. In this context, we are concerned that the airstrikes on Qatar risk disrupting the negotiation process at the expense of prolonging the crisis in Gaza, which has already led to serious humanitarian tragedy. Further delay in ending the crisis must be avoided. It is imperative to preempt any measure that would further deteriorate security environment in the Middle East or undermine remaining prospects for a lasting solution. Instead, relevant parties should endeavor to reach a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and to alleviate plight of its residents. Good faith dialogue and de-escalation need to be prioritized. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tanzania.
Thank you, Mr. President. We align ourselves with the statement delivered by Ghana on behalf of the Africa Group. The United Republic of Tanzania notes with deep concern the recent escalation of hostilities in the Middle East. At a time when the world is already burdened with multiple conflicts that have brought immense human suffering, our collective capacity to endure further crises is severely strained. Additional instability only undermines global peace, security, and development. Tanzania reaffirms the enduring principles of the Charter of the United Nations, respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. We therefore call upon all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to enhance dialogue and diplomacy as the only sustainable means of resolving their differences. In this moment of heightened global fragility, Tanzania urged the international community to strengthen multilateral cooperation and collective action to safeguard peace and stability and to uphold our shared humanity. Above all, we must ensure that human rights and international humanitarian law are fully respected and protected, with special attention to the safety of civilians, the dignity of those displaced, and the urgent humanitarian needs arising from the conflict. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la...
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. President. Canada condemns the strikes carried out by the Israeli Defense Forces in Doha. These actions constitute a clear violation of Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity, endanger civilians, and threaten to broaden the conflict in the region. Canada extends its condolences and solidarity to the government of Qatar, to the family of Corporal Badr Saad Mohammed Al-Humaydi al-Dasari, and to the injured security personnel. Canada reaffirms the need for strict adherence to international law, including the protection of civilians. While Hamas remains a terrorist organization that must immediately release all hostages and disarm, peace and security cannot be pursued at the expense of sovereignty, international law, or humanitarian principles. Qatar, together with Egypt and the United States, continues to play a vital role in mediation efforts to achieve a lasting ceasefire in Gaza, secure the release of hostages, and a surge in life-saving humanitarian assistance for Palestinian civilians. These efforts must be safeguarded. Canada calls urgently for a meaningful return to negotiations to secure an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, distinguished colleagues. I was informed that the delegation of Mali asked to take the floor after the list of speakers closed. If there's no objection, I will give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mali. Thank you, President. Mali aligns itself with the statement given by the groups to which it belongs and thanks the Human Rights Council for convening this urgent debate. Mali condemns the aggression against Qatar and expresses its solidarity with the people and government of Qatar and its institutions. President, targeting a mediator that is striving to find a solution to hostage release and the de-escalation of violence makes this increasingly complicated. Mali would invite all to respect international law, international humanitarian law, and the UN Charter. Mali also reminds us that the two-state solution is crucial for peace and stability in the region. I thank you. Thank you. This was the last speaker on my list. We're now going to turn to the list of national human rights institutions and NGOs. I give the floor to Qatar National Human Rights Committee.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the National Human Rights Committee in Qatar expresses its strong condemnation of the Israeli military aggression that targeted the civilian area in Doha, which is populated with homes, schools, kindergartens, diplomatic missions, and other civilian facilities. These attacks led to the killing of 6 civilians, including a member of the Internal Security Force who was performing his duties, in addition to several injuries and casualties. They also led to the worsening of health for some individuals with chronic illnesses as a direct result of the fear and panic. In this context, we recorded the interruption of studies for more than 1,000 students due to damage of schools and severe psychological impact. We recommend that your esteemed council consider the following. 1. Condemnation of the Israeli attacks and the resulting grave violations of human rights. 2. Adoption of resolutions that ensure accountability and contribute to ending impunity for these violations, which constitute some of the most heinous crimes. The National Human Rights Committee reaffirms its full readiness to cooperate with international human rights bodies and mechanisms and to provide them with detailed information. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Matt for peace.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. ترحب
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome this urgent debate to respond to the aggression, Israeli aggression on Qatar, which has led to the killing of a member of Qatari internal security and to civilian casualties. We hope, Mr. President, that peace-loving nations will put an end to the arrogance of Israel before it's too late. We reaffirm that the continuation of the aggression by the Israeli occupation authorities will lead to chaos and humanitarian catastrophe. It will lead to generations that do not recognize international law, international human rights law, generations who will only understand the language of revenge and force. The occupation authorities killed civilians in OPT, in Lebanon, in Syria, and now in Qatar. We hope, Mr. President, we call on the members of the Human Rights Council to agree on a draft resolution to put an end to Israeli hostilities on the sovereignty of state. We also call on states to stop the transport of weapons and ammunition to the occupation authorities. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to IADL by video.
International Association of Democratic Lawyers strongly condemns Israel's attempt to assassinate the leadership of Hamas in Qatar as they discuss a new U.S. ceasefire proposal. We express deep solidarity and appreciation to Qatar for its role as a mediator. Israel has a long history of political assassinations targeting Palestinian leaders and peace negotiators on foreign soil, including terrorist attacks in European capitals. In July 2024, Hamas political bureau chair Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran. Israel recently targeted resistance leaders and political opponents in Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Palestine, Yemen, Iraq, and Tunisia. These blatant crimes are the result of the impunity granted to Israel by its Western allies over the last 8 decades. The Human Rights Council must call on the Security Council to fully investigate the Doha attack and act under Chapter 7 to restore international peace and security. If the Security Council fails to fulfill its responsibility, the General Assembly must take the lead. The Human Rights Council must take all measures to protect Hamas negotiating delegation and the mediators working to end the ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing of Gaza. The Human Rights Council must unequivocally reaffirm the right of the Palestinian people to resist colonial domination, apartheid, and foreign occupation by all means, including armed struggle. Member states must assist the Palestinian people's exercise of their right to self-determination and independence.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to United Nations Watch.
The High Commissioner quoted the Secretary General, but what changed since 2011? When the US killed bin Laden, who was living in $1 million compound close to Pakistan's top military academy, the UN chief at the time celebrated that, quote, justice has been done to such a mastermind of international terrorism. Why has the UN now changed its position? To understand this double standard, we need only recall what Saudi Foreign Minister Al-Jubair said long before today's debate in 2018. Quote, the Qataris since the mid-1990s have been sponsoring radicals. They've been inciting people. They've become a base for the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood, which begot us Tafkir wal-Hijra, which begot Al-Qaeda. The Qataris allow their senior religious clerics to go on TV and justify suicide bombings. The Qataris harbor and shelter terrorists. The head of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula entered Saudi Arabia on a Qatari passport. We captured Al-Qaeda types coming with Qatari passports. The Qataris know this. The Americans know this. The world knows this. Quote, the Qataris pay ransom to terrorist groups, including $500 million to Hezbollah in Iraq, $50 million to Qasem Soleimani. The Qataris use their media platforms to spread hate. The Qataris send weapons to Al-Qaeda militias in Libya. There's a list of terror financiers that the UN puts out, and a number of them are living openly in Qatar, raising money and giving it to bad people. Why do the Qataris get away with it? All of this from the Saudi foreign minister. Mr. President, is not the accuser here the true enabler of terrorism?
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to Institute for NGO Research by video.
Yet again, this council is being exploited, wasting its precious time and resources that it claims it doesn't have because of Qatar, the world's leading sponsor of Islamist terrorism. Qatar now cries about sovereignty and dealing with the consequences of harboring Hamas terrorists. Highlighting the rank hypocrisy, there were no urgent HRC debates when Iran attacked Qatar in June, nor when Iran targeted Israeli civilians with more than 1,000 drones and 550 ballistic missiles. It is rich to hear Qatar complain about international law when it routinely violates with impunity Security Council Resolution 1373, legally binding under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. For more than 10 years, Qatar has offered warm welcome to the butchers of Hamas, putting them up in luxury hotels and financing their war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Qatar continued to illegally do so even after the October 7 atrocities. Qatar could have pressured Hamas to immediately release all the Israeli hostages, 48 still being tortured in Gaza, but instead, Qatar chose to be complicit in this monstrous crime. Qatar could have handed over Hamas leaders to the ICC for prosecution, but it refused. The evidence is clear. Qatar is unwilling and unable to uphold its obligations under Resolution 1373. Instead of exploiting this council, its leaders should be held accountable for international crime.
Merci, je donne la...
Thank you. I give the floor to Partners for Transparency by video.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. مؤسسة شركاء من أجل الشفافية العدوان العسكري الذي شنته إسرائيل ضد دولة قطر في التاسع.
We condemn the military aggression by Israel on Qatar on the 9th of September that led to 6 deaths and a number of injured and damaging critical infrastructure in a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law and the UN Charter. President, attacking a place of negotiation where peace negotiations are taking place is a glaring violation of international humanitarian law, and it threatens international peace and security and risks a dangerous escalation of aggression. This happened whilst Qatar has been working as a mediator to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza. This weakens the chances of peace and exposes undermines people's rights to peace and development. We call for an international follow-up mechanism to investigate these events and ensure more effective protection for civilians. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to International Youth and Student Movement of the United Nations.
Monsieur le Président, le mouvement international.
President, the International Youth and Student Movement for the United Nations firmly condemns the military aggression led by Israel against Doha. We stand with Qatar and commend its efforts to facilitate mediation and put an end to the carnage in Gaza. Israel once again demonstrates its contempt for the UN Charter and international law by committing systematic acts that meet the definition of genocide under the 1948 Convention targeting the Palestinian people. People around the world are raising their voices to insist that this genocide must stop and that peace and justice must finally prevail in the Middle East. We call on the Human Rights Council to adopt an emergency resolution urging states to impose sanctions and to sever all direct or indirect support for the occupation. We also urge the Council to call on the Security Council to adopt binding measures in accordance with the United Nations Charter. Mr. President, inaction in the face of genocide is not an option. International law and the conscience of the peoples demand immediate action. Turning a blind eye to such crimes against humanity is a betrayal not only of international law, but also of the future of humanity. The lack of action of the international community weakens the strength of international law and its institutions. Thank you. I give the floor to international lawyers.
Thank you, Mr. President. This urgent debate takes place at a time where the violations of principles and norms before this council has taken its ugliest form. We condemn the Israeli aggression on Qatar. It's a flagrant violation of the sovereignty of states and of IHL. We call on the council and the international community to take serious measures to put an end to this aggressive policy that's now targeting everybody. This aggression is part of the wider violations against the Palestinian people. Around the clock, these practices are crimes of genocide. They impose commitments on the states. They must implement these commitments in accordance with the Convention Against Genocide and international norms. We call on the Council to do the following: condemn the aggression clearly, to stop support to war crimes and crimes of genocide by stopping export of weapons to the Israeli occupation, and to stand against the policy of forced displacement, as well as enhancing accountability through the measures of the ICJ and fact-finding missions. Thank you.
Merci, je donne...
Thank you. I give the floor to Bahi by video.
Mr. President, we express our grave concern over the military aggression launched by Israel against the State of Qatar on September 9, 2025. According to UN and media reports, the airstrike in Doha's Laktafia district killed at least 6 people, including 5 Hamas members and 1 Qatari security officer, amid ongoing ceasefire negotiations. This act constitutes a clear violation of Article 2 of the UN Charter, which prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, and breaches core rules of international humanitarian law protecting civilians. This attack cannot be seen in isolation. Only months earlier, Israel's 12-day aggression against Iran left nearly 5,000 killed or injured, including 287 children. Such repeated violations reveal a systematic disregard for international law and regional peace. We therefore urge the Human Rights Council to establish an independent fact-finding mission to investigate these aggressions. We also call upon state parties to the Rome Statute to refer the situation to the International Criminal Court, ensuring accountability, justice for victims, and the restoration of peace and security. I thank you.
Merci, je...
Thank you. I give the floor to Arab European Centre of Human Rights and International Law.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the Arab European Center of Human Rights and International Law we express our strongest condemnation of the shelling or attack on Qatari territories by the Israeli army. This is an unacceptable violation of the sovereignty of Qatar and runs counter to international law. Such aggressions threaten regional and international peace and security. It undermines security and the stability in the region. We fully refuse the pretexts of Israel under the slogan of combating terrorism to justify their attacks and violations. They are trying to make violations of international law legitimate. Our center calls on the international community and the Security Council to shoulder their legal and moral responsibilities and to take urgent, tangible measures to stop the war on Gaza, to stop all Israeli attacks against civilians and the infrastructure.
Institute for Human Rights.
سيد الرئيس.
President, I am speaking on behalf of the Geneva Institute for Human Rights. We express our deep concern in the face of the cowardly Israeli attack against the State of Qatar in flagrant violation of the UN Charter and principles of international law and international humanitarian law. This is unprecedented and it threatens the international legal regime. There are also any efforts for peace are being undermined. This is an act of aggression and a flagrant violation of Article 2 of the Charter, which prohibits the use of force. This clearly violates the Geneva Conventions, threatens regional and international peace. Targeting residential areas and the killing of civilians cannot be met with silence. We would call upon this august assembly to condemn this aggression and bring about an independent inquiry in full transparency to guarantee protection for negotiators and ensure that there is respect for sovereignty of states. Respect for human dignity must be brought about through international commitment and the respect for international law. We count on this august assembly, Mr. President, to take all necessary measures. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to Traditional Medicine and Health Development Society.
Mr. President, we strongly condemn the recent acts of aggression perpetrated by Israel against Qatar. Such a style action represents a blatant violation of international norms and regional stability. Israel's provocative behavior towards Qatar reflects not only its disregard for international law, but also its growing pattern of aggression against any nation that dares to challenge its occupation and apartheid policies. This shows again that Israel creates instability rather than peace. Its occupation, expansion, and interference in other countries' affairs are part of a wide policy based on military force and silencing dissent. The international community must not remain silent in the face of such aggression, including a few months ago aggression against Iran. We call upon the global community to hold Israel accountable and to stand in solidarity with nations like Qatar and Iran that champions peace and justice in increasingly destabilization region. We urge all states to take concrete diplomatic and legal measures to deter further Israeli aggression and uphold the principle of international law. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la
Thank you. I give the floor to Organization for Defending Victims of Violence.
Mr. President, we strongly condemn the recent Israeli attack on Qatar, an unjustifiable act of aggression that represents a grave violation of international law, the principles of jus in bello, and state sovereignty. This blatant act of hostility not only undermines regional stability, but also sets a dangerous precedent that threatens international law. The escalating conflicts in the Middle East reveal a disturbing pattern of persistent aggression that undermines regional peace and security. For Israel, aggression has become routine. Israel's repeated aggressions have deeply destabilized the region. The consequences of this recklessness extend beyond borders, affecting international peace and security. A state's right to self-defense is a fundamental obligation to protect its citizens' lives, security, and territorial integrity. Accordingly, the right to self-defense is not merely a matter of state discretion, but a human right owed by the government to its people. When the international community fails to stand firmly against atrocities in Gaza, Israel grows emboldened, expanding its attack into Syria, Lebanon, Iran, Yemen, and most recently targeting Qatar during a ceasefire meeting. We call on the international community to hold Israel accountable for all these unlawful acts. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole au...
I give the floor to Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies.
Mr. President, Israel's recent attack on Qatar is not just an attack on another state's sovereignty. It has undermined ongoing negotiations and repeatedly obstructed diplomatic efforts to end genocide in Gaza. Israel appears determined to pursue legal objectives through military means rather than a diplomatic solution. This attack is not isolated. In the same week, Israel struck Sana'a, Yemen, killing 35 people, targeted the Freedom Flotilla in Tunisian waters, and continued to bomb multiple regions in Syria. These actions constitute clear violations of international law and the UN Charter, yet the international community has failed to take collective action to make Israel stop. For years, Palestinians have endured systematic violations extensively documented by this Council and its special procedures. Yet states, including EU states, the US and the UK, continue arms transfers and commercial activities that sustain these violations. As highlighted the recent report by Special Rapporteur Albanese, companies continue to profit from an economy built on oppression and occupation. Mr. President, we call on all states to suspend arms transfers, halt transactions that sustain violations, and ensure accountability. Anything less is condoning impunity, undermining international law, and encouraging acts of military aggression. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, distinguished colleagues. This brings us to the end of this urgent debate. We will have a brief break before we continue with our interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the right to water and sanitation. Thank you.